One more time, folks. Okay, we're live. I thank you for joining the second night of the Walpole Fall Town Meeting. We do have a quorum. I just want to read a quick media announcement, again, to remind our viewers to know that the Fall Annual Town Meeting is available tonight on YouTube as a live stream. Simply go to youtube.com and search Walpole Media TV, then click videos to view the live stream. I tell you it works. I watched a little bit of myself, and I said about 50 times. Just a quick announcement that Attorney General Maura Healey will be here holding a town hall Monday evening at 6:30. She will outline what she and her office is working on for Massachusetts and be ready to answer questions from those in attendance. A couple of other matters before we take up the first article of the evening. I'm going to propose, and I've talked to a few of the parties involved, that we limit this debate and discussion on Article 27 to 45 minutes. That sounds like a lot, but we actually debated Article 3 for 40 minutes the other night. So I think that'll get matters through. We can relax that if we want, but that's what I'm going to propose. Do I hear any objections? Thank you. Hearing no objections, we'll limit the debate for 45 minutes in total. I will also be enforcing the 5-minute to the primary sponsor. I will enforce it. I will remind you when there's 30 seconds. You are to wrap up your comments, and then everybody else is 3 minutes. I will remind you at 2.5. If I feel like maybe you're getting close, I might let it go to not break you. But if you're one of those people that tends to go and further, you might miss it. Ann, could you step up to the microphone just so everybody can hear you? Thank you. Keep talking, it'll come live. Yep. Yes, I'm sorry if I didn't specify that. I actually intended to. Great, so yes, if you want to ask for indulgence, that needs to come from the membership. So for extended time on debate, it is a 2/3 vote. Okay?
So even for the presenter of the article?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. The last comment I wanted to make is on the non-binding referendum, Article 28, which will follow Article 27 immediately. That will debate, because it's non-binding, will be limited to 30 minutes. I have told the sponsors of the article. If there are any objections. Thank you. Hearing none, we'll get the matter underway with Article 27, which is the first order of business.
Pledge of Allegiance? When?
After we pledge allegiance.
No, we do it every day. Yeah, we do. Everybody's getting up. Jim, don't argue with me. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You unpatriotic. And you mouthed the words. Thanks. You didn't even say the words. You mouthed them.
They've told me it was teamwork up here, and they ain't kidding. Article 27 is a petition for the appropriation to reduce the fiscal year 2018 tax rate. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash $1 million to reduce the tax rate for fiscal year 2018. Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 8-5-1.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus, Board of Selectmen.
The Board of Selectmen voted unfavorable action, 3-2-0.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Are there any questions or comments with regard to Article 27? Ms. Regusta, as the sponsor, you have first dibs.
To be able to stand before this body representing the hundreds of Walpole taxpayers whom I have heard from over the past several months as a selectman and the past several years as a town meeting representative. These are the voices of the young and old, the retired and the working, the small business owner, and taxpayers from all steps on the economic scale. What they all have in common, however, is that they are struggling to keep up with the enormously escalating cost of real estate taxes in Walpole. To present relevant information about Walpole taxation, I prepared handouts containing data from Mass Department of Revenue, and I've put them up on the projector. Could you put up slide number 2, please? As you can see from slide number 2, Walpole real estate taxes have increased 45% since 2008, an average increase of 4.5% per year. In real dollars, this means that the average Walpole homeowner's real estate tax bill has gone from over $4,900 to over $7,000, an increase of $2,229 in 10 years. You can see the numbers yourself. Slide 3, please. Looking at slide 3, I've identified 8 Massachusetts towns with a similar population as Walpole and a similar per capita income, and I compared their tax data to ours. Note that Walpole has a higher average tax bill than 6 of the 8 comparable towns. I understand that every town is unique. I'm merely presenting this data to exhibit Walpole's tax bill amounts compared to similarly situated towns. A significant data point on this sheet is Walpole's disproportionate ranking of our average tax bill to our per capita income. Walpole ranks number 59 in highest tax bills in the state, yet ranks down at number 73 in our per capita income. This is an indicator that Walpole may be taxing its citizens beyond their means. Municipal budgets primarily depend on property tax collected, and the amount of that tax is dependent on the wealth of the taxpayers. There's been quite a bit of information put out by various groups and individuals in the last couple of weeks relating to this article, including letters and memos containing unfounded claims that Walpole will be forever ruined if this article passes. I hope to put these claims to rest with additional facts about Walpole taxation. The claim that using free cash to reduce the tax levy will have a negative impact on the current budget demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of what free cash is. First of all, our fiscal 2018 budget has already been set and appropriated. Free cash, very simply put, is surplus funds from that budget. They are the remaining unrestricted funds from operations of the previous fiscal year. In the last 5 years, our certified free cash balance has ranged from almost $4 million to almost $7.5 million annually, representing 7 to 12% of our total tax levy. And yet, not once has any portion of these funds been returned to the taxpayers. Instead, it has been Walpole's practice to use it primarily to pay for capital budget items at fall town meeting, items that should be planned and budgeted for within the spring annual budget and through our 5-year capital budget plan. As I said, the use of free cash to reduce the tax levy is entirely appropriate. It was done in Walpole years ago and is currently done by other Massachusetts towns. In fact, almost 50% of Massachusetts cities and towns do not tax to their levy limit. This use of free cash will not reduce our current or future tax levy limit. This is but a one-time use of surplus free cash to reduce a one-year tax burden. In recent letters and publications sent to RTMs and parents, opposition to this article was framed by stating that Walpole is a town that always tries to do more with less. And to support that statement, included was a laundry list of items which would potentially go unfunded if Article 27 is passed. I respectfully disagree with that assertion. According to Mass DOR, from FY 2008 to FY 2018, Walpole's total annual revenues increased 4.5% each year on average. For FY 2018, Walpole is collecting over $32 million additional revenue than was collected in 2008. And the total amount of revenue Walpole collected since 2008 is over $964 million. As we sit here today, and knowing that figure, it strains credibility that Walpole has not been provided sufficient sums of money over the last 10 years to meet virtually every real need of the town.
30 seconds, Ann.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll just close up. For too long, the voices of the hardworking taxpayers of Walpole, the people who pay the bills, have been ignored. I hope that I presented sufficient information to enable this body to understand that the taxpayer of Walpoles are feeling the pain of unnecessary and unsustainable tax increases. We have a choice. We can choose to spend our free cash, as has been done for the last many years and was done 2 nights ago, or we can choose to vote yes to make a one-time return of but a modest percentage of taxpayers' money back to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ricosta. Does the town administrator have any comments?
Yes.
I apologize, Mr. Moderator, I forgot. I would like to make a motion to make this a roll call vote.
Okay, we have a motion to make a roll call vote. We need 20 members to stand to bring the motion forward. Would you please rise if you're in favor of a roll call vote? I think that's more than 20. Okay, for a roll call vote, I believe we just need a simple majority. Let me just double check. Yes, just a majority vote for adoption. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Thank you for using the right tone of voice. We will take a roll call vote when this comes to conclusion. Thank you, Ms. Ragusta.
Thank you very much.
Jim.
Sure. Mike, will you pull up Article 27 here, my comments there? Third from the bottom. Sorry. Yeah, right there. Thank you. Next slide, please. I'd like to take this opportunity to explain to town meeting some of the impacts that are going to be seen likely if this article is passed. Prior to 2001, the town found itself in a dire financial situation. The town administrator had resigned. The free cash was not available for capital equipment and infrastructure. And I'm actually told we weren't able to purchase loader tires, and all of our trucks had rotted out floorboards. Shortly before Christmas in 2001, the town passed an operating override at the end of the year to ensure that trash fees would not be implemented, class sizes would remain the same, pools would remain open, and funds would be used towards our free cash or capital improvements. Since then, the town, for the most part, has used free cash for capital and included it in our reserve ratio. This practice has allowed us to keep up with our capital needs and allowed the town to steadily improve our bond rating, which has led to decreased borrowing costs for the town. Next slide, Mike. Over the last 3 to 4 years, Walpole has done a significant amount of improvements around town. These improvements can be seen in all the buildings, the downtown improvements that were recently completed 2 years ago, the improvements on Hitching Post Road, among others. The plan going forward is to continue to use these funds to conduct these improvements, to stabilize some of our stabilization accounts, and to add funds to our OPEB liability account. Mike, next slide, please. On Monday evening, in his opening remarks, the Finance Committee Chairman explained some of the contributing factors to free cash. Unfortunately, he did not provide all of you with the same explanation I provided the Finance Committee at the end of August. As you can see here, between the $1.7 million carry forward to ensure against significant catastrophes, the $800,000 from prison mitigation, and the items identified for the schools in Articles 8, 9, and 10, those funds make up almost half of the free cash that was certified this year. The process of certifying free cash is not arbitrary, as the Finance Committee Chairman suggested it was on Monday night. There are a lot of planning and preparation that goes into identifying and certifying these funds. As many of you may expect, the major difference between private budgeting and municipal budgeting is there's not a lot of leeway there. It's extremely important for Walpole to budget conservatively. It would be fiscally irresponsible and detrimental to the town to do otherwise. Without conservative budgeting, there would be little to no free cash. An override may be inevitable. Services would likely be reduced, and our reserves will suffer. Next slide, please. I wanted to show everyone here in Walpole how we stack up to some of the towns that were identified in the previous presentation and some of the surrounding towns. As you can see, all towns here have certified free cash. Their property levy limits range, and as do their free cash, from $264 in Marshfield to $9.2 in Reading. There's a wide range here. Next slide, please, Mike. A yes vote in this article will reduce the amount of the average taxpayer pays this year by about $110. On the commercial side, the average taxpayer will be reduced by about $250. The top 3 commercial taxpayers are expected to see the following savings. Next slide, please. This article, as proposed, essentially is a $2 million decrease in funding this year. It's taking $1 million from free cash, which will reduce the town's capital improvement program, and it's reducing the amount of tax revenue taken in by the town almost in the middle of the fiscal year. Furthermore, it has not been made clear as to what is expected in future years. The town will need to make up these funds in some way during the fiscal 19 budgeting process. This could potentially mean a reduction of $660,000 on the school side and $340,000 on the town side. This could mean reduction in some of the new police officers we recently hired, elimination of the 4 new firefighter positions that were recently added over the last 2 years, or reduction in our DPW or recreation services offered. On the school side, it could mean a number of teachers in the classroom may be reduced, increased fees for busing, athletics, or full-day kindergarten. Again, it's not known because there's not a long-term plan. The impacts on the borrowing costs and our credit rating have not been explored at all. Last week, we received a credit rating call from our bond company, Standard & Poor's. They advised the town that we could be negatively impacted by the usage of free cash on an ongoing basis within the budget. The uncertainty at the federal and state level with the state budgeting unable to match their revenues has resulted in the state's credit rating being reduced recently. S&P views the town's free cash as part of our reserve ratio. They have explained that they view free cash as part of basically our rainy day funds. And if federally mandated cuts to school programs or local aid is reduced, we will likely have to dip into that. Next slide, please, Mike. A no vote in this article will allow the town to continue to budget as the town has budgeted for the past 16 years. We will be able to continue our capital improvement program, we'll be able to continue the roadways improvement programs, and maintain the quality level of services that people have come to expect from us. Next slide, please, Mike. Some have criticized town officials for not spending each and every expense budget down. We do not over budget, and I commend our department heads for spending only what is needed and saving money whenever it is possible. Some have criticized us for conservatively budgeting local receipts. Again, it's important to keep this figure as low as possible. Each budget season, a considerable amount of time is spent planning and developing a fiscally responsible budget for your body to consider. We continue this planning as evident in Articles 3, 4, and 5 that were recently considered Monday night. We want to continue to take Walpole into the 21st century with newer field space, elementary school improvements, and the manner in which the reduction is being presented is going to impact Walpole taxpayers by much more than the $110 on average each one of you will receive. A reduction in the taxes that levies against the town residents need to have a considerable amount of planning put into it. As we have done with our facility improvements, we can work with our partners in the school department and on the finance committee to plan for this and figure out what the impacts of services will be with the reduced budget going forward. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Salvatore, Precinct 4. Through you, Mr. Moderator, could I have a further explanation of how the $1 million turned into $2 million? How taking the $1 million out of this year's budget affects, I really didn't understand how it turned into $2 million.
Mr. Johnson.
I can explain that. Essentially, what we're going to do is be taking $1 million from free cash, which typically goes to our capital improvement program in the spring. So that $1 million next spring will be gone. We will not have any funds likely to do capital improvements. We are also taking $1 million from the amount we collect in taxes, our revenue, and taking that off the books this year. So that's where I'm getting the swing there of $2 million.
Just a further question. It's revenue that has been generated this year that you will be using next year. I don't understand why it turns into $2 million. I really can't even frame the question because I think the argument is just illogical.
So, Mr. Salvatore, it's not a question, it's a statement.
So I'll make my, so one of the discussion that we're having is starting a discussion about how we budget in this town. And I think what we're not spending over the last Monday night, we had free cash, and I think like we do at home, if we have some extra money, it's much easier to spend it. And I think what we're looking at here is that what we're trying to say is that when we have extra money, we shouldn't be just looking to spend it, and it shouldn't just end up in fall town meeting in free cash and look like money that we just have left over. It should be part of the regular budgeting process. And as we heard the other night and heard over and over again, it should be on the capital budget process, and it should be in the regular budgeting process. We should be making real choices with this money, and not just, you know, even when we were talking about this at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, I asked, do you have plans for this money otherwise? I heard no answer. And what I see in the warrant coming, then the warrant comes out, and I see all the plans for the money. So what happens is that there are certain powers in town that have plans for this money going forward. They have plans for the ambulance fund going forward, and they have plans for this money going forward. And what they do on an annual basis is they don't look at how much they're going to spend. They refuse to look at the issue of taxes. Prop 2.5 has been turned on its head. Prop 2.5 was supposed to be a ceiling, not a floor. I was floored when I went to my first I went to a board meeting for selectmen around the state, and everybody said, oh, you just automatically tax up to you raise the levy 2.5%, and then figure out how to spend it.
Mr. Salvatore, 30 seconds.
30
Apologize
seconds.
for the interruption.
And so what I'm saying is we need to start looking at the taxpayers, trying to lower their obligations, look at the budget, what we need to spend, and then raise the taxes accordingly. Right now, we're raising to the limit and then spending the money.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore.
If there's money left over, we should either be giving it back to the taxpayers or reducing debt.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Mr. Flowers.
Moderator, Andrew Flowers, Precinct 4. Could you pull up the presentation? Is Mike or Jeff? Okay, great, thank you. Andrew Flowers, Precinct 4, Finance Committee. I'm going to speak for a few minutes here about why I think you should vote no on Article 27. Next slide. There are 5 reasons I think it's misguided. 1, it's financially irresponsible. 2, it doesn't target taxpayer relief to those who need it most. 3, it's going to constrain the town's budget in the future. 4, it's bad timing. And 5, it prevents needed investment. And Jim Johnson spoke about 1 and 3, so I'll breeze over those. Next slide. Okay, financially responsible. As we mentioned, free cash, unpredictable from year to year. Historically, it's been used to fund needed capital projects or add to reserves. It's going to affect our bond rating, as Jim Johnson said. In a sense, Article 27 is penalizing the town for being fiscally conservative, right? We've been able to build several buildings without an override. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a point I really want to stress for those who want to advocate for taxpayer relief. Article 27, as it's written, essentially gives taxpayers relief directly in proportion to their home value. So it's going to benefit the wealthiest residents of the town the most. So even if you do believe that we need to give money back to the taxpayers, this is a bad way to do it. There are much better options that this Article 27 ignores. For example, the circuit breaker credit, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, it targets taxpayer relief to seniors. But there are other options to explore, such as the owner-occupied tax exemption under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 59. Next slide, please. As Jim mentioned, it's going to impair the town's budget in the future, even though it doesn't change the levy limit. It informally is essentially an underride in that it's going to either mean we raise $1 million less in revenues in future fiscal years, or if we want to raise up to the levy limit, it's going to be kind of a sticker shock, jarring tax increase for taxpayers. Next slide, please. Okay, terrible timing. Jim Johnson mentioned this a little bit with legislative uncertainty at the state and federal level. We've got healthcare and tax legislation that can impact Massachusetts and therefore impact our $800,000 in prison mitigation funding. Furthermore, on the topic of timing, if you were ever to cut taxes, it would be ideal to do it during a recession, not when the economy is doing relatively well. I mean, the unemployment rate's at like a 16-year low. Next slide. Here's my 5th and final point that I'm going to dwell on. We do have important capital projects that need to be funded, and free cash historically has been used to do that. Unlike the petitioner, According to my analysis, Walpole's property taxes are not out of the ordinary, but our low level of investment is. One stat I want to cite here from ClearGov, it's that our per pupil capital spending in the school system is $441 as of 2016. That's 59% similar districts. I want to stress to you, when you think about this, the future of Walpole, including your rising property values, including businesses, it depends on steady and sensible investment. Next slide. These are the last two charts. This goes back to 2003. It's showing Walpole's tax rate compared to the median Massachusetts town, basically in line. Next and final slide. Walpole's property taxes in 2015 is the red dot. It's comparing every Massachusetts town, their median household income to the average single-family tax bill. We're pretty much in line. Again, the point here is we need steady and sensible investment in our schools and infrastructure, not spending money willy-nilly, but using free cash in a responsible way. Thank you. Please vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Valencourt, just so you know, folks, John's raising his hand because I wasn't going to have him run back and forth to the microphone.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I want to try and clear up some of the math and some of the inaccuracies, that I think have been spoken and put out in letters by recently by town officials, and maybe the problem with the math, maybe that's indicative of other reasons why our budgeting, is not better. So this is a $1 million reduction in the current balance of free cash. It has nothing to do with the town's levy limit. The levy limit is the property tax revenue that the town is entitled to raise this year and next year. So that levy continues to increase, and there's absolutely no impact upon that levy limit or that revenue in future years. So the idea, the suggestion that future budgets, operating budgets, are going to be impacted by this are just blatantly untrue. And I don't know how that math is being propagated. I'm going to address some other comments here. So, the bond rating. So we talk about, you talk about the bond rating, and the bond rating takes a holistic view of the town, all of its reserves, including free cash and others. Well, it's interesting, whether you spend $1 million to drain Memorial Pond or you spend $1 million to give taxpayers some relief, it's the same impact to free cash, the same impact to the bond rating. So I think what we've got going on here is a lot of hyperbole and a lot of exaggeration about what we're talking about here. So it needs to be clarified and it needs to be addressed. This town, and I'm speaking as the finance chairman, I'm looking at the numbers, this town systemically generates $2 to $5 million a year in free cash through either more revenue than we budgeted or less expenses than we approved. Now, you can call that conservative if you want. I might characterize it as something else. And from my analysis of the FY18 budget that's been approved, and nothing can touch that. The school spending, all of the operating budgets, they're in place for 18, and nothing can touch those. I project there's another $2 to $4 million in free cash being generated in the FY18 budget. So any concern that this million is going to impact next year's operating budget is just not true.
30 seconds, Mr. Valencourt. Apologize.
So I think, I think I've addressed the inaccuracies and the hyperbole. Those are the numbers and those are the facts.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Pittman.
Pittman, Precinct 1. What's our bond rating right now?
AAA2. AA2.
Which is?
Second from the top. AAA is the top. AA plus.
How did FinCom vote on this? I didn't quite hear it.
FinCom vote 8-5-1 in favor. Favorable action.
In favor of?
Favor of approving 27, giving the taxpayers a refund.
And the bonding agency has commented or weighed in on this at all? Did they come in and talk to you folks about if this occurred, that somehow the bond rating would be impacted, and if it is, that could affect our cost of
through you,
borrowing?
Mr. Moderator, no, the bond rating agency.
Mr. Valencourt, you know what? No, go ahead and respond, but please let me direct the question. Mr. Valencourt.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you. No, they never came in and spoke to us.
You're the Finance Committee. Mr. Moderator? Why wouldn't they come and speak to you? I find that odd. When I was on Finance Committee, they came and spoke to us. No, I suggest then, through you, Mr. Moderator, that you invite them in and see how this impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pittman. Mr. Kraus.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Eric Kraus, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen in RTM Precinct 7. Let me shed some light on this article and explain why I am against it and felt compelled to send a letter co-signed with the chairwoman of the school committee to this body. Before doing so, I do want to applaud the article's petitioner and my selectman colleague, Ann Ragasta, for her efforts. I have no issues with the work of Ann, or anyone for that matter, to investigate ways to responsibly reduce spending. I do have issues, however, significant issues, with the article's language, and specifically the $1 million underhanded underride it proposes. At the end of the day, we have never used free cash to balance the budget, so we shouldn't propose to use free cash to reduce the budget. The town's reserve policy is to maintain a reserve ratio of 5 to 15% of the operating budget. Free cash makes up a portion of that reserve ratio. We are currently within this range, and any decrease would be detrimental and could cause structural deficit. Long-term capital plans, such as roads, schools, fields, potentially will be at risk at not getting done if the town does not have free cash on hand to do them. Maintaining our infrastructure will, in fact, increase home values for the taxpayers of Walpole. Conversely, failure to maintain the town's quality education, public safety levels, and capital infrastructure plan will decrease the town's property values. There has been zero collaboration and no transparency with the discussion of this article. It is being proposed after the budget has been set and voted on at the spring town meeting. A more appropriate time to discuss reducing the levy limit would be to have those discussions in November or December prior to the town administrator making his recommendations so that he and the superintendent of our schools can adequately plan during the budget development process prior to their recommendations being presented to FinCom in February. And finally, there has been no discussion about what this article, if passed, will do for our corporate taxpayers. Will the 10 largest taxpayers, anchored by Eversource and Siemens, be receiving a tax relief? That seems counterintuitive and somewhat ironic given the debates that this body has had over the recent past. Collectively, the Board of Selectmen discussed Article 27 in August and voted not to move it forward. The majority of the board was concerned that the article was not fully vetted and the ramifications of such a drastic change to the way we budget in Walpole could have enormous impact on the services that our towns provide. Rather than a yes on this article, we suggested then, and I am suggesting tonight, that a financial leadership team comprising individuals from all boards be established in Walpole to discuss and fully vet this issue. In fact, the school committee has been suggesting such an approach in its meetings for more than a year. This would result in increased collaboration and transparency in our town as it makes financial decisions. It is only by working together and listening to various viewpoints that we can all make a stronger financial decision to impact the future of our town. In closing, our bond counsel, bond rating agencies, financial advisors, and auditors have lauded us for sound budgeting practices. This same group of advisors, assessors, and bond raters all have cautioned us against approving this article. And quite frankly, I agree with them. Please join me in voting against Article 27.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Snuffer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Snuffer, Precinct 2. And forgive me, the people from cable told me that if I turn to speak to my fellow RTMs, you will only see the back of my head on streaming. I'm relatively anxious to speak to you. I will be respectful to the purpose and intent of the citizens' petition. However, I do want to point out that on a pragmatic basis, once you agree to spend money, money becomes fungible. Nice fancy word, but arguably it becomes a commodity. It can be used for many and varied purposes, and it does not necessarily provide equal dollar for dollar value, situation to situation. It affects your individual quality of life very differently on a case-by-case basis. For example, this article, as proposed, attempts to offer tax relief through the use of $1 million free cash. Our auditors and generations of financial wonks refer to free cash as one-time money, and I agree. So let's look at the stark reality of this article. For the average home, valued at $467,000, it has the net effect of returning $10 per month to this homeowner. A homeowner with a house valued at $935,000, I wish you were all in this group, $20 per month will be your reward. As a practical matter, it is frankly little to no help for either. Missing from this until tonight, this was the first time I heard and had a clue, as you did, as to what does it do to commercial property rates. Also missing and worth noting, on a national basis, the average home increased in value by $40,000 over the last 5 years, a straight line increase of $667 per month. You can do the math. Continuing with the concept that money is fungible, while treating it as we should as one-time money, what if we use this $1 million of free cash differently? For example, something very near and dear to my heart, let's say the senior center. You could fully fund and pay for every piece of furniture for that facility, 3 transportation vans, several computer stations, a full room of exercise equipment, every table, chair, pot and pan, a complete industrial kitchen, several high-definition large-screen TVs, a complete healthy living outdoor environment with furniture and landscaping, and you would still have money left over.
30 seconds, Mr. Snuffer.
Another example, our schools could buy 3,704 of the best Chromebooks, significantly investing in and advancing digital learning for nearly every one of our children attending school. As I said, money does become fungible. Metaphorically, I realize that tax for many is a 4-letter word. I do applaud the motivation, not the logic. However, along with Selectman Kraus, I encourage the town administrator and the Board of Selectmen to continue the dialogue, bereft of rancor and distrust, and place, excuse me, 1 second. I'm worried about that 30 seconds.
They're not getting much more time. I am running a clock up here. I gave him a 30-second warning. You are at the end, Mr. Snuffer. Please wrap.
Thank you very much. To put us on a path where the most challenged of our citizens know that they are valued by this community. Create specific, practical, doable, affordable, effective, long-term solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer.
This petition has made this community the most divisive I have ever seen it.
Mr.
Please
Snuffer,
join me
Mr.
in
Snuffer,
voting no.
Mr. Snuffer, please.
I
Thank you.
apologize.
Ms. Regusta, I understand your concern, and I apologize. I did try to cut him off. I tried to be a little leeway. I asked him to close, and I made a mistake, okay? I do not, listen to me. No, you listen to me. Do not yell at me, okay? I will yell back, and I've got a louder voice than you do, all right? With all due respect, I understand and I apologize. From here on, I am going to be very strict on the time limit. I will cut you off. I'm going to cut the microphone if I have to. Is that what we want? Yes. Then that's what I will do. Okay? Yes, you may.
How much time was Mr. Kraus allotted?
Mr. Kraus actually went 3 minutes and 1 second by my clock.
I think with all due respect, Mr. Moderator, I timed it myself. It was 4 minutes.
Guess whose watch wins? Sorry, I try to be fair as possible. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, through you to the voters, the RTM members. The last time this was done was in 1983, I believe, when I was sitting on the Board of Selectmen. And I can tell every voting member tonight that everything ended very happily. Nothing fell apart. It worked out well, and the taxpayers got a little relief. I know it's only a little relief, but they deserve it. And I will cede the rest of my time to Ann. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Ms. Gayris. Ms. Gayris is making a presentation from the school committee.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Gayositz, head of the school committee. The school committee voted no action with respect to Article 27 by a vote of 5-0-0. I encourage you to vote against this article. The petitioner wants you to believe that free cash is a result of residents being taxed more than is necessary, and that it's surplus funds that should be returned to the taxpayer. However, it's important to remember that just like in any household budget where money is not immediately allocated to paying a particular bill, there are many other needs or necessities that the money could be used for. Free cash in our town has historically been used to pay for necessities, such as capital projects and funding our reserves. I suggest that we continue to use free cash to invest in the future of our town. The petitioner keeps talking about a refund. I understand that the idea of a tax refund is sexy. Everyone loves more money in their pocket. But we need to ask ourselves who's going to be benefiting from a refund, if this is even possible to give the taxpayers money back in this manner, as I'll further get into. If we are refunding $1 million, approximately $170,000 will be going back to commercial properties. What is left would go to the taxpayers so that the average taxpayer will receive a refund of a little over $100. But those who are the wealthiest in town will get much more of a refund than the average taxpayer. Surely we can explore other options. There must be another way to ensure that those who are actually in need of tax relief are the ones who are benefiting from a refund. Without clear answers on how to implement Article 27, I am worried that this article may be implemented in such a way as to have a multi-year impact. I listened to the discussion on this article at the FinCom meeting, at which this article was originally proposed and presented to the public the other night on October 12th, and I still have questions. Ultimately, I was only able to attend a small portion because it conflicted with our school committee meeting, so I didn't get to ask these questions. Mr. Trudell asked this question at the first FinCom meeting, and Mr. Ardian raised this issue again. The petitioner would like you to believe that this will just impact 1 year. But how is this going to be accomplished? I don't think she's given us clear answers. Do we even have a software program that will allow us to refund taxpayers if that's what's being proposed? And if we're going to purchase it, how much is that going to cost? There are so many unanswered questions. If we take $1 million out of
Ms. Gayodis, can you please wrap up your comments? Thank you. Sorry.
All right, I'm going to address everyone to actually read the wording of the article. It talks about a sum of money to reduce the tax rate for fiscal year 2018. That is the wording. I didn't write it. I've talked to experts. I'm an attorney who has a degree in finance, but the experts in town, the town treasurer, town assessor, and town accountant have informed us that this will in fact have a multi-year impact. If you take $1 million out of the base, that's going to result in $660,000 less each year for the schools given the split. That would be devastating. That's not hyperbole. That's what you wrote in your article. So in closing, I agree with Mr. Kraus. This is an underhanded way to pass an underride. I don't agree with this. I think this article is premature and needs to be further vetted. To borrow Ms. Regosta's own words, when referring to Article 5 in the field study not listed on the capital project 5 years plan, why are we skirting the fiscal and budgetary process for an item of this magnitude? Please vote no tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Gayodis. Just so anybody has any question, Ms. Gayodis was speaking from the school committee, so I did give her more time, but I did cut her off as well. Okay, I did that with the town administrator, and I will do that with, just to be clarifying, town officials. I was, on their presentations, I was giving 5 minutes. I probably wasn't clear on that. I want to clarify that. Mr. O'Leary.
John O'Leary, Precinct 3. I'd like to first say, I listened to the people up on the stage and some of the other town officials. All I hear is, Wolf! Wolf! Taking this $1 million from this year is not going to affect any other year. It will not affect the tax base, as has been stated previously. Why should the letter that have gone out between Mr. Kraus and Mr. Gayodis have been signed as chairman of the Board of Selectmen and chairman of the school committee? If they wish to send something out as RTM members or as individual citizens, fine. But by identifying themselves by their position, they're giving the impression that it's the entire board that is supporting them and that they're speaking for the board rather than as individual citizens. Taking $1 million from free cash, we're taking it from an asset that's sitting in one of our accounts, and we're transferring it to, if it passes, we'll be transferring it to a revenue account. All it will do is reduce the amount of additional revenue that must be collected to make up what we expect to get in. There is going to be no effect on our regular revenue stream. In reality, it may come into revenue and go right back into free cash, for all we know. Based on the articles provided by the Finance Committee, we have had benefits of free cash every year. Since we have been having so much free cash come in, maybe it is time to re-look at the items. If we do have this free cash, we shouldn't be using the free cash just to spend it because we have it. Capital budget has a purpose. We have a whole board set up to examine the items needed and to bring them forward to the town meeting. We should not use just found money to randomly choose, oh, let's spend this year. We have a purpose for spending and acquiring money, and I think we should keep to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Val Corey.
Yep, I'll give my time to Ann.
I'm sorry. You've already spoken, so I'll go to the subsequent speakers. I will give you time to come back in.
Thanks.
Excuse me, point of order, yes? No, it is not, sir. It's getting close, though, but you're correct.
Hi, Val Corey, Precinct 2. A little bit confused, as I typically am, actually, about free cash fund, and I know there's another fund that's sort of like a free cash fund. Stabilization. Does anybody know the name of it? It's like sort of like a rainy day fund that I believe the town has. Well, anyway, I'm wondering the difference between the two, so no one can help me out with that, with the other.
Is that Mr. Valancourt, Mr. Johnson? Did you want to ask the question?
Sure. It's the stabilization fund. It's a balance of about $2.3 million. That's the rainy day fund to be used in the event of emergencies, shortfalls, and otherwise.
So typically a similar type of fund for spending purposes, for shortfalls, for, roofs or equipment or...
Through you, Mr. Moderator. It's not...
Excuse me, Mr. Valancourt. Mr. Johnson, did you have a comment?
Yes, it's actually specifically different from free cash. It's covered by a Massachusetts general statute. I'm sure council here can help me out with that. But I can tell you it requires a vote of town meeting to put it in, which you took Monday night. You put in, I believe it was $200,000 in there. And then to get any funds out of there, it requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting. The Mass General Law is Chapter 40, Section 5B. So it's separate.
Okay, they just seemed a similar purpose to me, so I was a little bit confused as to you could take this from this and that from that and keep everyone happy. That said, I think that the article, if nothing more, and I know $100 isn't a lot, and I know if you have a really nice house, $200 a year isn't a lot. I think it's just a good faith thing. But other than that, the only reason I really got up was to address Cliff trying to transfer the $1 million for furniture for the senior center. Seriously? That can't possibly be more important than keeping the items here. And quite frankly, I don't see anything about repairing the sidewalks that have bumps in them the size of you've never seen and potholes all over them. So I don't know who makes up the exact list, but I think the list itself, if we do not vote this article in, should be revisited to things that maybe affect more of the people in the town of Walpole. I also personally probably wouldn't spend much money on the schools at this time until you know whether you're building new schools and then therefore would not need a boiler replacement because of that. For instance, I'm just saying, all in all, I think it's a show of good faith, even though it's cheap money to the taxpayers of the town. I think it all should be revisited. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. Ms. Gallivan.
Thank you. I'm really concerned about the multi-year impact, and I'm just going to try to explain it in simple terms. When we bring in revenue, we set a budget for FY18, and I know that we're fine for this year's budget. We've scheduled to bring in $69 million. If this passes, we will only be collecting $68 million from local revenue. Next year, when we go to start our budget, we will have $68 million, not $69, to start with. And I think some people are suggesting that free cash could come in and take the place of that $1 million gap, but free cash is one-time money. So in my mind, we either have to cut $1 million from the operating budget before we start planning next year, or we have to surprise the taxpayer with an extra large bill to make up for the $1 million gap that we don't bring in this year. That's why I firmly believe that this is a multi-year impact. Some people might make the argument to say, well, we've got so much free cash, we'll have another $1 million for next year. Okay? I don't buy that, but if you do, then that just pushes the problem off by 1 year. We're causing a multi-year impact if we don't bring in the revenue that we planned our budget for this year. It affects the operating budget. It's not maybe obvious. At first, I wasn't sure, but I believe that we need to understand there's a multi-year impact.
Thank you, Ms. Gallivan. So we are now at the 45-minute mark. We've got 5 people in line. I propose to let those 5 people speak. And I'll tell you right now, we are balanced on the fors and against based on the comments made. I'm going to leave it to you folks because we can extend this. We can do it on my authority or we can take a vote. He's a citizen, it's okay. Mr. Kelly, I see you. I've explained to you that the RTM members go first. I apologize, Mr. Kelly. It's the RTM members first and we still have members to go. So, do I have a motion to extend the debate?
Point of order, sir.
Yes, Mr. Damish.
I was up here before Ms. Gallivan was, so I thought I was going to...
You know, I do the best I can, and I appreciate that, and I apologize that I skipped you for Mrs. Gallivan.
So I would ask that I would have the option to speak now, and then you can do your vote. Please.
Do I have a motion? Yes, Mr. Morawski. So, Mr. Morawski, let me cut you off right there with all due respect. You're right, there is nothing in the Walpole Town rules, but the town meeting time clearly spells out the rules for limiting debate, and I proposed it in the beginning and this body agreed to it. That is why I'm asking right now if you want a motion to extend the debate, which can be had with a second and a 2/3 vote. So, unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to allow Mr. Damish and these 4 other people to speak, and then I'm going to cut the debate.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of extending the debate, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
It's a 2/3 vote. I'm going to say it was a 2/3 vote. We're going to let Mr. Damish go ahead and speak. Mr. Damish, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Damish, Precinct 7. I'm not going to throw any numbers around. We've heard way too many numbers tonight. Instead, what I'm going to tell you is what I've been hearing from the common Joe, the average citizen who's been reaching out to me in the last couple of weeks on this matter. They support Ann's article, as I do as well. And what I've been hearing, some of these words are mine, some of these words are theirs, but the town needs to strike a balance. We need to strike a balance between what we're spending and what we're taking in on taxes and what we're going up on the annual tax rate. Ideally, taxes should have around a reasonable rate, one that allows people to enjoy the town services while still being able to afford to live in the town. Now, I know the citizens backed Ann's article because they also backed her in her race when she ran last spring. And she ran on the platform of fiscal responsibility, and she won rather handily, I may add. Also, the voters yesterday voted for Jacob Ventura, another candidate who ran on fiscal responsibility and for less taxes. It was a tight win, but he took Walpole as well. Finally, I just want to close with, when President Obama was in office, he would ask the American people to constantly pay just a little bit more. All the people in Walpole are asking me at this point in time is, why can't the town just spend a little bit less? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damish. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim O'Neill, Precinct 8. The town has made great strides in the maturity of its financial management practices over the 20-plus years I have served as an RTM member. Over that time, we have become increasingly proactive about long-term planning, maintaining adequate reserves, and have begun to enjoy the benefits of those solid financial practices in a better bond rating, lower borrowing costs, and a better employee stability. Part of our job here at town meeting is to enable our town administrator to maintain stability through the inevitable peaks and valleys of the economy. Over the time I've been serving here, which is 20 years, what I've seen is we've been able to build up the stabilization budget. We've started to address the future needs of post-employment benefits. This is the OPEB thing we talked about at the end of the last meeting. We worked down our capital borrowing obligations. We've improved our bond rating and the cost of borrowing. We've maintained more reserves that allow us to weather unanticipated cost increases and state funding shortfalls. This allows us to avoid expensive forced employee layoffs to stabilize our workforce. We are benefiting from investment income. Most recently, we've started to do large capital projects, including building projects without debt exclusion overrides. That's a big deal. I actually liked what Mr. Snuffer said about the senior center in particular. We're building a building, but we're not paying to put anything in the building right now. And that's a big deal. So a building without furniture and without the related things that are required to operate as a senior center is a big deal. And I could see how apportioning some of the money from free cash to support the senior center and the build out of that senior center would be a really good idea. And it does have the benefit of affecting a very distinct population within our town in a very big way. So I actually applaud what Mr. Snuffer said. In addition, back to the OPEB comment, I don't know about you, Mr. Moderator, but I was again surprised by the degree to which we're underfunding OPEB, and I would suggest that perhaps a better use of that $1 million would be to fund OPEB as well. Just a couple of thoughts. I think in the end it would be irresponsible for this town meeting to endorse a proposal that undermines 20 years of progress in our financial practices. Living hand to mouth is never desirable. Please join me in voting against this article. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Ms. Majeski.
Hi, Majeski, Precinct 8. So $1 million, so I'm a no vote, which surprises me. I don't like paying Uncle Sam either, but $1 million amongst a population of 25,000 is completely negligible. It's more of a political act. And with $1 million, we're losing the economies of scale here that everyone could benefit from. So I wanted to just touch on one of my experiences with this and then a recommendation. So it's very, very small scale, but I was treasurer at Tufts University, so I got to manage $1.5 million, which was exciting at the time. And we had a surplus of $500,000, so a third of the budget wasn't being spent. So I thought my best move there would be to lower the taxes. So we did lower the fee. It took a ton of time, ton of effort, but we did lower it by a very substantial amount. And I was really proud of that. But part of the funds was also put towards projects. By the time I graduated, I had planned what I expected all the taxes to be. And at that point, it had exceeded what it would have been otherwise if I hadn't lowered it. If we're not trusting, I guess, the budgeting process, this is also a story that can be used that we lost $1 million. Therefore, we need to raise taxes to accommodate this. So if this is coming from a way to benefit taxpayers, I don't think this is a way to really make an impact. If we're talking about we're worried about the way Walpole is budgeting, I think it makes more sense to have a long-term plan. So I'm glad this conversation's coming up. OPEB, I'm glad that was mentioned. I think that would be step one. If we're identifying $2 million needs to be put in a year, that would be one way. But I think a more long-term could be some sort of resolution. If we're worried about the future of the tax rates going up, something like a resolution, a commitment that our taxes won't go up for 5 years. If we're happy with the money we're putting away, an emergency fund should exist, and $1 million one time isn't going to do anything, because next year they're going to have that story saying we lost $1 million, we need more from you. So I think a long-term plan would make sense. I can't speak to the feasibility of it, but we do have OPEB on the table. And I'd much rather have $1 million for the town rather than $40, $100 in my own pocket. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Majeski. Sir, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Hi, Mr. Moderator, Sean McCauley, Precinct 2.
Thank you, Sean.
All I've heard is 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. Well, just for sake of argument, I'll speak to myself. Last year, I had an extra tax burden of $3,800 for kindergarten for my oldest, and next year is $7,600 because I had twins. And my timing is going to cost me, personally, $10,000 as an extra burden. I'm not asking for a handout, but a $100 rebate is a bicycle for one of them. I would much rather see it go toward an education for the youngest families and this burden spread out. This is absolutely insane. I personally cannot understand how $1 million out of 25,000 people for an average rebate of $100 has been debated for 50 minutes. Mr. Moderator, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Sir.
John Curley, Precinct 1. My question is with the wording here. It's being presented like we're going to give people a rebate, but I'm seeing up here to reduce the tax rate. So does that tax rate stay reduced until it's either voted or decided to raise that rate? Or I don't understand. This doesn't seem like the wording of a one-time, return. I don't know if anyone can help me with that.
Ms. Regusta.
The tax rate's calculated, it's directly tied to the tax levy. So the tax rate changes each year depending on the amount of the tax levy and the assessed values of the homes to which the levy is applied, and the tax rate is calculated by that. So
Thank you, Mr. Regusta. Mr. Curley, do you have more comments?
I mean, I don't know, I just have a problem with the wording, I guess.
We could.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Ms. Regusta, I'm going to let you have final comments. So take it away, please. Please limit it to 3 minutes, and then we're going to call the vote.
I may be briefer than that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Leith came up afterwards. Your way, Ms. Regusta.
Okay, thank you. With respect to the comment that this is an underhanded underride, that's completely false. It's not underhanded anything, and in fact, the new officials finance form handbook put out by the Department of Revenue, the levy, I will read it directly from the book. The levy limit is the maximum amount of property taxes that a community can raise in a given year. Each year, the levy limit is calculated based on the previous year's levy limit, not the actual amount levied in the previous year. Therefore, choosing not to levy up to the levy limit in 1 year does not affect the following year's levy limit. I'd like to make that clear because that addresses both Ms. Giosit's and Mrs. Gallivan's comments in misunderstanding of how annual budgets work. With respect to our fiscal year 2018 budget, that has been appropriated, that was approved and voted on at spring town meeting. $69 million was the tax amount of the tax levy, and that's what the appropriations were based on. So yes, the $1 million would come from free cash, remove it, take it from free cash, and apply it to the $69 million. Each year stands alone. It does not compound. It does not have any compound negative impact. That's all I can say on that. With respect to the question of whether our tax assessor will have the proper tools in place to calculate for each taxpayer, that is easily done, although I would not do it myself because that's not my bailiwick. I'm sure Mr. Fliss is perfectly capable of that. If he is not capable of it, he can certainly refer to the towns of Hopkinton, Sherborne, Great Barrington, and Westwood and ask their assessor how they calculated their tax levy when taxes were applied from free cash to reduce it. I'd like to also address a lot of comments about it's such a small amount, I'd rather see $100 go to my kid's bicycle. I think it is unconscionable, and I think it is very inappropriate for the RTMs to place a personal value judgment on what is a lot of money or what is a little money to an individual. I find that unseemly, and I don't think it's an RTM's place to make that judgment. That is the taxpayer's place. I think taxpayers themselves would find that offensive. I would also like to just comment, and this is neither here nor there, it is really interesting to me how $1 million is not very much money, in just a drop in the bucket, when we want to spend $500,000 on future fields or $1 million to drain a pond, but all of a sudden $1 million becomes this huge amount that the town somehow cannot overcome in its budget. Again, $960 million has been collected by this town in the last 10 years, and $1 million of that cannot be returned to the taxpayer in the form of a reduced tax bill. And it's not a reduced tax bill to even keep the tax bill level. It is a reduction in the amount of growth that is projected for the fiscal year 18 tax bill.
Ms. Regusta, thank you, Ms. Regusta. All right, folks, I've been tolerant with the applause because I actually thought it was too much to stifle it, but let's hold the applause and let's kind of move forward. I'm going to let Mr. Leith speak because we voted to extend debate, although in my mind it was to the final few speakers. So, Mr. Leith.
Thank you, John Leith, Precinct 1, RTM, and FinCom. And I'll be very quick. Just 2 points I wanted to make. First is that I believe Proposition 2.5 has been in effect for 35 years. When it first came into effect, the inflation rate was quite a bit higher than 2.5%. Over the last 10 plus years, it's been quite a bit lower than 2.5%. But during that time, the town, like many towns, this is not directed just at Walpole, but the town has taxed to the full levy, and that's been at about 4 to 4.5%. So during the last 10 years, the town has been collecting quite a bit more money than what basically the cost of services has been. So I do feel that there are a number of needs in town, but I do think after 35 years, the taxpayers could use a break, and so I think that $1 million is perfectly within the scope of that. The last thing, and I will say as quickly, is that there have been some comments about, well, it's only $100 per household. That's not very much, as though that is a compelling argument. But I can imagine what the argument would be if this were $10 million and we were trying to make a $1,000 benefit to each of the taxpayers. People would be crying bloody murder. You've got to start somewhere, and I think that the place you start is at a reasonable figure, which I think this is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leith. Sir.
Jack Fisher, Precinct 3, and I happen to be the chairman of the Board of Assessors. I would like to clarify and correct some misinformation that has been postured about tonight. First of all, what was said about the levy limit is 100% correct. That is not affected by any amount of any action that you take. The levy limit increases by, in a very regular fashion by 2.5% plus new growth. That's the state law. What we do with what you can change is the levy, the amount of money to be raised by taxation. And that is what this is about. This is to reduce the amount of money to be raised by taxation by transferring free cash into to fund the budgets. That's what this is all about. It has nothing to do with the levy limit. It has to do with the amount of money you want to raise by the levy. Exactly. And what's happened is that.
Keep talking. We lost the microphone. You want to run over here?
You're pretty loud.
Is that better? First time in a long time that's happened. So keep that in mind. What we're doing is we're adjusting the amount of money to be raised by the levy, not adjusting the levy limit. Now this becomes important. People say this only has a one-time effect for 1 year. That's just not true. All right. If you reduce the amount of money to be raised by the levy this year, then what are you going to do next year? You're going to have to reduce either your expenditures or you're going to have to increase the levy back up. So if you reduce by $1 million this year and then don't restore that money next year, you are in the hole. And I'll give you a very apt analogy that someone gave to me. I don't take credit for this. Let's suppose two families have $10,000 in savings. One family decides to go to Disney World. The other decides to spend $10,000 towards buying a vacation home. The next year, they don't have $10,000 in savings. So the first family just doesn't go to Disney World. The second family has to reduce expenses, operating budgets, whatever you want to call it, by $10,000, and really make some hard decisions there, right there. So there is a multi-year impact, and what you're doing is you're playing with the levy, not the levy limit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
And just one other thing, when we talk about the tax rate, I'm sorry, I meant to bring this up. When we talk about the tax rate, what happens is the classification hearing, which will actually be happening in 3 weeks from last night, okay? The tax rate gets set. There are three things that go into to establishing the tax rate. The first thing is the amount of money that has to be raised. In other words, what's the levy? The second is what's the value of assessed property in the town. And the third is the decision to be made with respect to the shift of some of the tax levy from residential to commercial. Okay? Whatever happens, we can make that calculation very quickly. It is no rocket science to make that calculation. We have done it every year for the last 50 years, and we will continue to make that calculation depending upon the action of the Board of Selectmen and what happens tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Okay, at this point in time, we have debated for over an hour. I see no other members coming up to the microphone, and I do think there was an intention to stop after so many. We've extended beyond. So at this point in time, there has been a motion and seconded and approved for a roll call vote. So I'm going to turn the podium over to the town clerk.
The list to vote? No. I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep it. Well, I want to keep the names down. You can do the tally. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to begin with calling the names. If I don't hear a vote, I'll call your name twice to give you a chance to answer it. We'll start with Precinct 1. Megan Ahigian. No. Danielle Akins. Danielle Akins. Catherine Conti. Yes. John Curley. No. Nancy Dayan. No. Jennifer Gaotsitz. No. Breyer Hassenjaeger. Yes. Darren Hassenjaeger. Yes. John Hassenjaeger. Tim Hempton. Yes. George Hodges. George Hodges. John Leith. Yes. Glenn Mayfie. No. Scott Mayfie. No. Jennifer McAndrew. No. Jillian Morley. Jillian Morley. Lawrence Pittman. No. Christine Walzer. No. Ronald Ardeen. No. Andrew Basevich. No. Lisa Marie Bastianelli. Yes. Mark Breen. Mark Breen. Thomas Coyne III. Susan Curtis. Kistra DeMasso. Barbara Gallivan. Allison Hamilton. Andrew Johnston. Valerie Corey. Alice Lawson. John Lombardi. John Lombardi. Sean McCauley. Clifton Snuffer Jr. Judith Stanton. Chandler Sullivan. Ann Walsh. Laura Whalen Bratsis. Jane Bergen. Edward Damish. Edward Damish. Ross Doty. Ross Doty. Laura Lee Dulay. Janet Fasanello. Patrick Fasanello.
Yes.
Kenneth Fettig. Kenneth Fettig. John Fisher.
No.
Patrick Hinton.
No.
Susan Masterson. Susan Masterson. Michael McGrath. Michael McGrath. Betsy Mullen. Suzanne Murphy. John O'Leary. Robert O'Leary. Ann Ragosta. Martha Ryan. Maureen Smith. Catherine Turco Abedi. Richard Brown. Susan Brown. Josette Burke. Paul Connolly. Virginia Connolly. Carrie Denizio. Joseph Deneen. Joseph Deneen. Andrew Flowers. Justin Hayner. Stephen Hendricks. David Luongo. David Luongo. Edward Lynch III. Fiona Murphy. Susan Naughton. John Robinson Jr. John Robinson Jr. David A. Salvatore. David L. Salvatore. Jill Tackett. Jill Tackett. Mark Trudell. Jonathan Bourne. Harry Clow Jr. Harry Clow Jr. Craig Dalton. Peter Drogan. Peter Drogan. Don Freiberger. Kathleen Garvin. Bernard Goba. Bernard Goba. William Hamilton.
Yes.
Maura Harding Clow.
Yes.
Edward Jakowski.
Yes.
Joanne Mulligan.
No.
John Murtaugh. John Murtaugh. Bruce Norwell IV.
No.
James Pellegrin. James Pellegrin. Eric Samarjadelis.
Yes.
Kenneth Southwood.
Yes.
Paul Stashikevicius.
Not that bad. Yes.
Michael Thiele.
Yes.
John Valancourt.
Yes.
William Abbott.
No.
Thomas Bowen, Jr.
Yes.
Thomas Brown.
Yes.
B.J. Burke. Donna Donnellan. Robert Donnellan. William Finucane, Jr. Audrey Grace.
No.
Jennifer Healy. Jennifer Healy. Jean Hogan.
No.
Wayne Leston.
Yes.
Sean McDonald.
Yes.
Sally Rose. John Shepherd. Donna Sherman. Clifton Snuffer III. John Spillane. Kristen Cyrek. James Taylor.
Yes.
Gerald Blair.
Yes.
Robert Buckley.
Yes.
William Buckley, Jr. Cheryl Karen. David Clark. David Clark. Diane Culhane. Philip Zakrowski. Robert Damish. Edward Forsberg. Louis Hegler. Louis Hegler. Paul Hegler. Paul Hegler. Eric Kraus.
No.
Richard Laronde. Michelle Mercados. Richard Notabart. Richard Pila.
Yes.
Lucy Romanowitz. Albert Tedesco. Albert Tedesco. Harry Brusades. Brian Connor.
No.
Emilio Di Virgilio, Jr. Paul English.
No.
Mark Gallivan.
No.
Nancy Gallivan.
No.
Mary Ellen Gioso. Richard Giusti.
Yes.
Kathleen Grulich.
No.
Sarah Khatib. Christy Majeski. Susan Maynard. Susan Maynard. Joseph Maraski.
Yes.
Beth Musini. James O'Neill.
No.
Nancy O'Neill. Victor Senna.
Yes.
Susan Spendley. And Lisa Vanderlinden. Is there any RTM that I did not call? Okay, if you give us a minute, we're just going to add these up. Thank you.
94 said yes. It's only a majority. 84 majority. Yeah. That's not bad.
Let me just check. Let me check the town council.
10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 85, 84.
Yeah, how about
2 to 1.
We're spotting.
84 to 45.
We knew it was futile.
It's not important. Well, we'll let you know what the yes. Excuse me. That's an excellent idea, Mr. Trudell. We'll take a few-minute break now while we tally up the count, and then we'll get back and get cranking. Quiet. The results of the roll call vote for Article 27 was 84 no, 44 yes, so the motion fails. A quick comment before we start on Article 28. I am going to try to correct my timing issues, which Ms. Regasta brought up. I was trying to find the spot where to interrupt the speaker without being rude. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to say 30 seconds over you in the middle of your speaking, and I'm going to stop you at 3 minutes on the nose, because I need to be fair, and I do not like the fact that anyone felt I was being unfair, and I am going to try to correct that. So just please be warned, and please kind of address it appropriately. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Morawski.
And I don't want to belabor the point. I know what you're trying to do in terms of trying to move town meeting along. But our rules are very specific on speaking. Our rules specifically do not give any RTM number, any time limits. The only person who gets a time limit is a member of the public coming in. They get 5 minutes. I think we need a rules committee to be appointed in order to, you know, if we're going to go this road, then we've got to change the rules. We determine the rules. How we determine whether a speaker stops speaking is someone gets up and moves the question. That's how you end a debate. You don't say that you end the debate on the basis of the time is up. A town meeting member, according to what I understand, has an unlimited amount of time, particularly in the order of importance, a petitioner. Now, I'm not debating the article, I'm debating the rules, and the rules are very specific. The other thing that happened.
Mr. Morawski, I'm going to cut you off there because, listen, I want to agree with a good portion of your comments, but I will tell you that the rules do not stipulate that every person has an unlimited amount of time. I will also tell you that this body actually agreed on a 45-minute time limit on that article. Let me just finish because I want to respond and I'll let you come back. I actually asked and no one opposed, so it was a proposal and this body agreed. Now, it is not specify one way or the other. At that point, I agree with you. I also agree with you on the Rules Committee. Unfortunately, Rules members weren't appointed in the spring. We will reappoint them next spring, and I agree with you. We need a Rules Committee, and we need to address some matters. Thank you, Mr. Morawski. So, speaking of time limits, this non-binding resolution has a 30-minute debate time limit. I have notified the petitioners ahead of time. If anybody right now would like to relax that time limit or remove it, I am willing to entertain a motion. Otherwise, we'll stick with 30 minutes. Seeing none, we will proceed. Article 28. This is a petition to adopt a non-binding resolution. It is for no action. Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted no action, 8-5.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus, Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0, no action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. We have a substitute motion on this article from the petitioner. One second, Ms. Grace. Do we have that signed? I have the motion. I gave you the piece of paper, right? That's the movie. Do you have the piece of paper that signs the motion? You gave me the motion, and we have the one to move it.
I have the cover sheet and the attached substitute motion.
Phil, I think you just gave us the article to move. You gave me the language of the substitute motion, but you didn't fill out and sign the motion. Can you just come down and do that now so we can get that in order? No, Ms. Grace, don't leave. Yeah, well, whoever's submitting the substitute motion. If you are, you want to come down? I have the motion, you can just say C attached.
I did sign it.
No, you did that on the change the order of the motion.
No, I did it the other one.
We don't,
But we could do this.
yeah, could you just do that, because we don't have it. You can just say C attached, because you already gave me this. That's okay. Thank you, I appreciate it. Yeah. Phil, you need to sign it too. Two signatures, you need to sign. Just sign next to me. I think that's quite all right for my thank you. Okay, we have a substitute motion by Ms. Grace and seconded by Mr. Chekarowski. And the substitute motion, if you look in your booklet, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm going to kind of point out where the changes are. So in the first paragraph, where the town will adopt the following resolution, whereas the detestable message of hate professed by neo-Nazi and white nationalist organizations added and all other hate groups, and then it continues on as previously written. Subsequently, in the third paragraph, whereas today white nationalism and neo-Nazism remain very real threats to the values the town of Walpole stands for, and then the alt-right in the rest of the language in that paragraph is removed. Everything else remains the same until you get down to, therefore be it resolved, that we, the town of Walpole Town Meeting, strongly denounce and oppose totalitarian impulses, violence, xenophobic biases, and bigoted ideologies that are promoted by white nationalists and neo-Nazis and inserted, and all other hate groups, and then it continues on as previously written in your warrant. Those are the changes that I understand to be made. Ms. Grace? Thank you. Ms. Grace, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Next slide, thank you. So just briefly what this article does, it just recognizes that neo-Nazi groups, white nationalist organizations, and all other hate groups promote ideologies that further hatred, bigotry, violence, and specifically against individuals based on race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and immigration status. So basically, we took some feedback that incorporated from the hearings of the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. We added all other hate groups, and we took out any passing reference to alt-right. This also recognizes that Walpole is dedicated to civil rights for all. This is not political. So I think left, right, or center, we can all agree that Nazis and white nationalist organizations and hate groups are bad and not good for Walpole. So this is not meant to be some political action. Next slide. This article calls upon the town meeting to strongly denounce white nationalist organizations, neo-Nazis, and all other hate groups. And it simply asks that this resolution be posted on public buildings. There's negligible cost to this, and it does not infringe on freedom of speech or assembly in any way. And next slide, please. I just want to quickly go through the First Amendment because I know there's some sort of free speech argument in opposition to this. I, in my previous career, was a criminal defense attorney, so part of my job was to raise First Amendment challenges to criminal laws and criminal violations, so I'm well versed in the First Amendment. In fact, I often raise the First Amendment in challenges for my clients who are charged with crimes. Next slide, please. This is just a summary of the First Amendment, the specific parts relevant here. If any of you know, the First Amendment was made applicable to the states of the 14th Amendment, but anyway, so Congress refers to all body of government. Next slide, please. So first of all, this is not a law, so there's no First Amendment violation. No one's ever going to be charged with anything, or the town can take no action in response to this to punish anyone for making these sort of speech, and there's nothing abridged there. So the First Amendment, it's a great right, but there would be nothing to enforce or challenge there. So I think any concern about the First Amendment or implicating freedom of speech in any way is unwarranted. Next slide. So I just want to focus on the fact that this is language that is substantially similar to what was passed in bipartisan action of the state and other towns and in the federal government. Next slide. The Massachusetts House and Senate passed a joint resolution unanimously. They use the same language denouncing and opposing these totalitarian impulses, violence, xenophobic biases, and bigoted ideologies promoted by white nationalists and neo-Nazis. Next slide. And this is the statement that our governor, Charlie Baker, made when he signed this proclamation. Specifically, he said it's vital for public officials to speak clearly and forcefully, that we should denounce these actions forcefully. So that's what we're asking to do today with this article. Next slide. President Trump also did signed a resolution. There was a joint resolution of Congress. Next slide. And he also said that we should condemn, in every strongest possible terms, the egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence, and we must unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence, and that racism is evil, and that those who cause violence in his name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. And these strike at the very core of what makes us American. Next slide, please. So why is this necessary, you might be asking, in Walpole at this time? First, there's an unprecedented rise in hate crimes. There's been a 91% jump in hate crimes directed at Muslims in the second quarter of 2017 compared to the same period in 2016. Anti-Semitic incidents have jumped 86% in the first quarter of 2017. Other minority groups, including Latinos, Asians, to Muslims, to the LGBTQ community, have reported a spike in hate crimes directed over them over the past year and a half. It's also, as town officials, our duty to speak out. When you hear people stand up and say, we shouldn't vote for this because it's a waste of time, this is not appropriate for a town meeting, I'd just like you to think back on those who say that's a waste of time, that's a privilege. It's a privilege for you to say that this is a waste of your time because you are not impacted by these sort of racist and bigoted ideologies. So, but I ask you to put yourself in the shoes of other people of color in this town.
30 seconds.
People from different ethnicities and they're asking for this. They're asking their town to stand up and to say, we don't want any hate in Walpole, and we won't stand for these organizations and other hate groups here. So the residents of Walpole, all of you represent them, we're generally decent and nice people. Walpole's a wonderful place to live for all people of all races, religions, ethnicities, and identities. And this is the time for the town meeting to make a public statement affirming that.
Thank you, Ms. Grace. Mr. Salvatore?
First of all, I want to first say that I do not speak for the Board of Selectmen, and I'd like to also have a little, just aside to that. When the Finance Committee votes on something, it changes the main motion, and that has real impact. The vote of the Selectmen is just advisory, and you can completely ignore it, and you should. I only speak as an RTM from Precinct 4, and every time a selectman speaks in this meeting, they're only as RTMs. But that's just the beginning. We were sent here to do a job to help run this town. We've had some spirited debate on Article 27, which is very important about the financing of this town, and we've had a very reasonably civil debate. What's happening here is we're bringing the national discourse into this body, and it's going to create divisiveness. It's going to create unnecessary discussion of the language of this article. And if we end up voting on this article, if we end up accepting a substitute motion which asks for favorable action, there are going to be some people who will be forced to say no because they don't like the language of this. And what you often have to look at is what's the newspaper going to say the next day? And the newspaper is going to say 40% of Walpole refused to accept this statement against hate. And what it's going to look like is Walpole is a racist town. Let's look at this. We're not even halfway through what we need to do tonight. Let's do the town's business. What will, if we don't do this, what we're going to have is next year it's going to be Blue Lives Matter. The year later it'll be Black Lives Matter, Unborn Babies Matter, and we're going to have this body turn into all these federal issues. When I ran for office, when I went door to door, I often said, I'm only going to focus on town issues. One woman asked me if I was pro-abortion. There were crosses all over the house. I knew what the answer was to give her my
30 seconds.
To get my vote. I refused to answer her because even though my views were similar to hers, I did not feel that that's a town issue. And we should keep town issues as town issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Mr. Czachorowski.
Philip Sharofsky, Precinct 7. I just want to really speak to say why this is so important for town meeting to vote for this. And I think the best answer to make sure that the newspapers don't say that we have some racist people in town is if we all vote for it. And it's hard for me to believe that we all wouldn't vote for something that denounces white nationalist, neo-Nazi groups who are racist and who have hateful language against people of color, people from different countries, people of different religions. So yes, it's true that we should be speaking up. And the reason we should be doing it is because as town officials, we have an obligation to set a principle, to set to be a model for our town, and also to respond to those people who we represent. So if you look at issues that we face, certainly we have financial issues which are important, but quality of life is equally important. And this may not be something that is a dollar amount on a budget, but it affects the quality of life and how we welcome people to our town. So we have an obligation, a moral obligation, because really it's a moral issue. And no matter where violence or discrimination or racism or bigotry occurs in our country, it's incumbent for all of us to speak out. Even in Walpole, whether we agree or disagree how much of a problem there's here, the fact that there is a problem in Massachusetts, that there's a problem in the United States, when we all speak out, that's a way to stop it. And so we have a moral obligation to do that. So again, I really find it hard to believe that most of us, if not all of us, can't agree that this is a particular case where we want to condemn this type of hateful language which promotes violence, which promotes racism, and so I urge the town meeting to vote in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Czachorowski. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I rise against this resolution because I don't think it's necessary for the town to do it. I attended the funeral of a Green Beret soldier who was killed on the battlefield, and the Westboro Baptist Church demonstrated against his funeral. And everybody at the funeral agreed they had the right, the freedom of speech, to do that demonstration. However, the town did the right thing, and they limited the area that they could demonstrate, and I think Walpole needs to look at the same rule to do so we can limit debate, any kind of debate like this, to a section of town where it won't interfere with a funeral or anything else. So I rise in favor of having the selectmen do something like that, but I stand against the motion. I grew up in Roxbury, and I learned very early in life, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. People have the freedom of speech, and that's the way America is, and I'm proud to be here, and I support the freedom of speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. You guys changing the order on me? I'm writing names down. You're changing orders on me. Go ahead.
You know we're new to this. Nancy Day in Precinct 1. I am in favor of this article, and I have a statement I'd like to read from Reverend Kristen H. Mills of the Episcopal Church here in Walpole. Dear neighbors, in the Episcopal Church, whenever we perform a baptism and welcome a new member into the church, everyone in the parish has a chance to renew the promises that were made at their own baptism to live a life as a follower of Jesus Christ. In baptism, some of the vows we make are to persevere in resisting evil, to strive for justice and peace among all people, and to respect the dignity of every human being. These vows remind our church community of our values and our promise to follow the teachings of Jesus. They remind us of who we are as a church community. It's true that resolutions such as Article 26 are not binding promises or vows, but they do help to remind us who we are as a town community. My prayer is that we want to be a town that stands united against racism, hate, and violence, so that we can be a town that is welcoming and safe for all people. Please join our Massachusetts State and House and Governor Baker in condemning hatred and racial injustice and pass Article 28. Peace. Reverend Christian H. Mills.
Thank you, Ms. Dane. Ms. Harding-Chow.
Maura Clow, FinCom and Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, through you, I am speaking to ask town meeting members to vote no action on Article 28. While I believe its support is to be well-intentioned with real and serious concerns, town meeting is an inappropriate venue to vote on any matter that places free speech at risk and puts our town at risk for violence and legal trouble. This article selectively condemns white nationalists, neo-Nazis. By not mentioning other groups, it effectively condones their actions. So, for example, Nazis are bad, but ISIS is okay. For example, more world citizens, U.S. citizens, and Massachusetts citizens have died as a result of ISIS and extremist Muslim groups in the last 15 years than from Nazis, but there's not a mention of denouncing those groups. Everyone in this room is associated with the group. You may be a full-day kindergarten supporter. You could be a lacrosse parent wanting fields for your children, a member of Walpole's many houses of worship, a Boy Scout, a Girl Scout, a Democrat, a Republican. You are allowed to voice your opinion and ask for consideration from the government, and every group has opposition. What if your group is very vocal and some people don't like what you're saying? Can another resolution be drafted, and can you become a hate group? This article uses inflammatory language to play on citizens' emotions while placing them at greater risk for government control of their speech. If this article is enacted and resolutions are placed on all town buildings denouncing certain groups, how will we stop members of these groups from entering our buildings? What if an adult in our town has a swastika tattoo? Can they not enter town hall with their blatant display of what is denounced? What if they have school-age children? Will they be allowed to attend parent-teacher conferences? Does the principal prevent them? Do they have to call the police? As that I'm not an attorney, I consulted with Mark Brewer, the former executive chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. Additionally, for decades, Mark has devoted himself to do pro bono work for the ACLU, specifically in First Amendment cases. I sent him Article 28, and Mark responded to me. So I'm going to quote him. The real danger here is the slippery slope. If Article 28 is adopted, it could be used by a town official to attempt to justify the suppression of speech in violation of the First Amendment. That will be expensive for the town. Not only will it make free speech martyrs of the group individual whose speech is suppressed, but the town will be sued, lose, and have to not only pay its own attorneys, but the attorneys for the plaintiffs in that lawsuit and possibly damages as well. Those attorneys may be from the ACLU or from any law. Whether Article 28 is passed or not, the group it singles out will have the same constitutional right to march, speak, whether or not the town welcomes them. This may be counterproductive. By not passing the article and staying neutral regarding speech, the town will be doing exactly what the law requires, providing equal access and protecting the right to speak for everyone regardless of what they say. That was the opinion of an ACLU lawyer. To be clear, I do not support any of the groups mentioned in this article. I don't like anybody that marginalizes our fellow citizens.
Thank you, Ms. Chow.
All right.
Ms. Pratzis.
Laura Whalen-Brancis, Precinct 2. I just wanted to share with all the 30-some-odd pages and nearly 300 signatures that our constituents signed and read the entire document, spoke about different things. And I do have a story from someone in our precinct, Precinct 2, who is an Indian Muslim, and her son has gone to Old Post Road for many years, and they were talking about multiculturalism last spring when I was running. And she told me that kids that he grew up with that have known them all their lives turned and said, so-and-so, because you're Muslim, are you a terrorist? And he went home and said to his mother, Mommy, what does terrorist mean? Someone called me that at school. These are friends and kids that grew up. And I know people have said, this isn't a town issue, let the parents teach them. Well, clearly, where would they have heard that? My children don't watch the news. I don't discuss things like that. They know nothing about this. I teach them to respect everyone and love everyone the same, and it really is sad that there is opposition to this. Anyone that I showed this to and spoke to about it said, why wouldn't I sign this? You know, a couple of people did say that they agreed and they didn't want to sign, but I think it was because they were nervous to support something like this. And this is in no way going against anyone's freedom of speech or anybody's right to come here and do and say what they would like. We're just saying that it's not okay. And again, these are people who live in Walpole that have signed this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brassens. Ms. Hagee?
Hi, Megan Hagian, Precinct 1. Just through you, Mr. Moderator, would like to respond to those who say that this is not a town issue. And I'd like to respond by reading the Peace Builder Pledge from the Old Post Road School. I pledge to praise people and to be kind to everyone. I will try to be a good leader and to notice and speak up when others have hurt feelings. I will build peace at home, at school, and in my community each day. If this is what we're teaching our children in Walpole schools, I would love to know that the grown-ups believe in this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hagee. Yes.
Susan Naughton, Precinct 4. I have the honor of reading a statement from Reverend Anna Flowers, pastor of the United Church. Dear friends and neighbors, in Hebrew scripture, the book of Ecclesiastes teaches that there is a season for everything and a time for every purpose under heaven, including a time for keeping silent and a time for speaking. Today, the time is right for our community to speak. I urge you to raise your voice and vote in favor of Article 28. While it may have seemed unnecessary or superfluous for communities to condemn Nazis and white nationalists in the past, we have witnessed a rising tide of racism and hatred across our country. The events in Charlottesville should have rattled us to our core. And if we had hoped that such hatred and violence would never reach us here in idyllic Massachusetts, the smashing of the Holocaust Memorial in Boston days later dispelled that delusion. Sadly, it wasn't even the first time this summer that someone took a rock to the glass of that holy site. It's no longer possible to turn a blind eye to these incidences. Judeo-Christian scriptures teach us to seek justice for the oppressed, to raise up the lowly and protect the most vulnerable in our society. This requires naming and identifying who the oppressed and vulnerable people are in every time and place. Today, we would be morally negligent if we did not name that in this time and in this place, minorities and people of color are facing oppression. In order to create communities that are welcome to everyone, we must explicitly condemn the forces that oppress them and make an extra effort to welcome them. Jesus taught us that whatever we do for the least, the last, and the lost, we do for him. While I know that not everyone shares my Christian perspective, I pray that my words will resonate with the moral values that we all hold dear as neighbors and fellow human beings. Let us strive to make Walpole a safe and welcoming place for everyone. Let us pass Article 28. Reverend Anna Flowers.
Thank you, Ms. Naughton. Mr. Buckley.
Mr. Moderator, Buckley, Precinct 7. I went to Fisher School, named after Martin L. Fisher, who gave his life on August 18th, 1862, in the fight against secessionist white supremacists. And I remember one day we had Rocky Rockwood come and visit us and explain how he helped to liberate Europe, and in so doing was maimed by a mortar shell. The people who lobbed the mortar shell at him did not do so because they disagreed with him on municipal tax policies. They did so because they were members of the Waffen-SS, Nazis fighting the final battle of a racist endeavor to subjugate Europe. And tonight I was just wondering what Rocky would say if he was still alive and listening to this debate. Mr. Moderator, I rise in support of the substitute motion, which our amazing Republican governor, the legislature, the Congress, and our president have passed similar ones to. I reject the notion that this is beyond the purview of this body. In 1776, this body voted to rebel against King George, and then in typical Walpole fashion, later voted not to pay for it. I find it hypocritical that our friends who argue this beyond the scope were the loudest voices just a year or two ago in favor of more action by this town meeting, arguing, as I do now, that the town meeting is the vox populi, the voice of the people, and that this legislative local body, all matters of public concern should be debated. I also reject the notion that this is against free speech. I love the First Amendment, and the Second Amendment for that matter. The whole Bill of Rights is pretty good, and I recognize and always will fight to protect the rights of anyone to express their opinion, no matter how disgusting I may find it, or how, as long as they do so without violence. You may express your opinion, and I may express my disgust with it, and persuade others to reject it. Freedom of speech does not guarantee freedom from criticism of your ideas. Tabling this citizen's petition and taking no action is the absolute antithesis of free speech, and a measure which should have been just a simple yet powerful symbolic act is given more heft and importance by the debate here tonight. Mr. Moderator, we live in a great town with great schools. We have wonderful public safety officers, many of whom I grew up with and whose unimpeachable character I can attest to personally. This resolution does not take away from that. It affirms it. Mr. Moderator, I am far from progressive, but my Catholic conscience compels me to support this resolution, to reaffirm the sanctity of personhood, the divinely guaranteed rights of every individual, and to condemn hatred based on race, religion, or class. I'm tempted to roll call this, but I won't. This room is full of people I care about and respect. Friends, this is the time for choosing. Look upon the merits of this assertion of the fundamental American ideas of freedom and respect, and join us on the side of the angels. Because in your heart, you know this is right.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Ms. Khatib.
Hi, Sarah Khatib, Precinct 8. I'd like to request to yield my time to a resident in my precinct.
According to our rules, the RTM members speak first, so as long as there's RTM members in line, that's the way it's supposed to go. So I'm going to leave it with that.
With all due respect, Mr. Moderator, I would just hope that you consider this member in my precinct as a person of color, and this particular body is rather lacking in color, so I think it's a very important perspective to hear from.
Okay, I've been appealed to. I'm going to basically throw it out to the audience to decide, because when we can allow a citizen to speak, it will be limited to 3 minutes as other. There are other members here to speak who are elected RTM members, so I'm going to take this person off. But I'm going to have the other members speak first, and then we're going to cut it at 30 minutes. And then we're going to let that citizen speak unless I hear this body oppose that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Mr. Snuffer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In the interest of trying to cut some of the time, I remembered to look up something that profoundly moved me as a student when I was studying the Second World War. A prominent Protestant pastor by the name of Martin Niemöller emerged as an outspoken foe of Adolf Hitler and spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camp. He is most perhaps remembered for this quotation: "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. My fellow RTM, I pray that this body is always studied and contemplative, but never silent. Please join me, place both feet on the line, and please vote yes. Thank you."
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer.
I believe Colonel Bazovich was up waiting before me.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch.
Andrew Basovich, Precinct 2. I intend to vote in favor of Article 28 and recommend that others do as well. That said, I would have preferred that the resolution not come before this body in the first place. Not for a second would I question the good intentions of those who have sponsored it. Frankly, not for a second do I believe that passage of this resolution in any way abridges our freedom of speech. But as others have suggested, the resolution strikes me as way out of our lane, and I certainly would prefer that town meeting focus on matters where we can really make a substantive difference. I don't see that. I don't see this resolution as meeting that standard. Still, we are where we are, and we will either approve this article, or we will vote it down, or we will find some way to dodge the issue. And if we vote in favor of it, it's my bet that very few people will actually notice. The risk comes if we vote it down, or if we contrive some way to dodge the issue altogether. That's when we will invite derision, and we will risk bringing embarrassment on the town. It seems to me we do not want Walpole to earn a mark of distinction as the town that was invited to condemn white nationalists, racists, and neo-Nazis simply couldn't find the will to do so. So I recommend that we vote yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Basevich. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I agree with Mr. Chekarowski. When we speak out against hate crimes and we cast a vote, it should be a bloody landslide. But the amendment that was presented to the selectmen was turned down 5-0. Hint 1. It went to the FinCom. It was turned down. Hint 2. In the weeks or whatever it was taking to put this thing together, when suggestions were made, the only words that were removed were basically alt-right, if I can understand the edit. Okay? We can come up with a document that has this town stand out against hate crime that every one of us can agree to. Yesterday afternoon, I sent an email to the town moderator, to Mr. Johnson, and I asked the proponents to be copied. I gave them a document. I invited them for edits. They did nothing. I will submit that amendment proposal if we want to move to vote on this thing. But we should be all standing together against hate. But this document was given multiple opportunities to get to a place where we could go and vote on this thing unanimously. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. We are at our time limit. There are 2 more speakers. Well, we also have the citizen. So this is your meeting. I'm here moderating. I tried to set some time limits for it, but I want to be respectful. Mr. Snuffer, I think you have a point of order or motion?
I have a point of order. Extend, please, by 15 minutes.
Well, that's a motion, but I'll take that. Yes, we're going to extend by 15 minutes. We'll finish up right here. So this gentleman.
John Curley,
Thank
Precinct
you, Mr. Curley.
1. I'll try and be quick. This issue isn't about legal and illegal. This is not a binding resolution. This is an issue about right and wrong. And we are the leaders of this town. And where do we want to lead this town? Do we want to lead this town in a position, into a place where we dig our head in the sand and pretend that the problems of the world don't affect us? Or do we want to take a leadership role and teach our children that hate just is not acceptable to us? I'm not saying that a neo-Nazi can't come down Main Street waving a swastika flag because of this resolution, because this has no effect on that. But the fact that that person is going to do that, I do not have to be happy about it. I do not have to sit idly by and let that happen without raising opposition. This measure is stating very clearly that this town does not approve of racism, and frankly, no one should. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Ms. Denizio.
Carrie Denizio, Precinct 4. It's clear to me that many people in this room wish they were never asked to condemn white supremacism and neo-Nazism in this fashion. Sorry. What I said was, it's clear to me that many people in this room wish they were never asked to publicly condemn white supremacism and neo-Nazism in this fashion, but now we have been asked. And once you are asked, there can be no hemming and hawing, and there can be no trying to be dismissive based on technicalities. Even still, the petitioners of this article have made a good faith effort to address the concerns that were raised by members of Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. They have worked to make their statement as inclusive as possible. We all stood for election to hold this position. We all signed up to be town leaders. You cannot do that and then try to evade this type of responsibility. And I consider a no vote or a vote for no action on this article to be an abdication of leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Denizio. Mr. Ardeen.
Ron Ardeen, Precinct 2. I received some calls on this, and I shared the same sentiments that many members here, that this was not an article that should be on town meeting floor. I went to the Finance Committee the other night, and I believe there was 2 or 3 people that live in this town. They said, and they were minorities. They were minorities, and one woman was a Jewish woman, and they said they didn't feel safe in this town. That made me think over the weekend that Walpole's motto is "We're the friendly town." One of the motions up there in the article is to make everyone feel safe in this town. If this motion is enough of a motion to make people that live in this town feel safe, I say I vote on it. I usually don't speak to these type of articles, and when people called me this week, I said, you know, I don't think this belongs on town meeting floor. I think in the presence of people not feeling safe in this town, I think it is something that belongs in this town. Congress has spoken on it, the President has spoken on it, the Senate has spoken on it. Something that hasn't happened at all this year, those 3 bodies agreeing on something. So I don't know why this body can't agree on it. We've had the legislature vote on it and the governor vote on it. I think it's time that Walpole remains the friendly town and takes this and makes all our citizens feel safe in this town. If this is what it takes, then I think it's an important motion, and I hope the substitute motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Ardeen. Ms. Kadeen, please come. Yes, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Katia Santiago Taylor, and I am a member of the Precinct 8. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak today. So I'm going to start with what Desmond Tutu said once. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. I am a Puerto Rican woman living in this community. Although many people in Walpole are welcoming, the reality is that racism is as real in this community as the sense of friendliness and acceptance. When a mostly white community does not want to denounce neo-Nazis and white supremacists, it tells people like me that we're not welcome here. That stating that Walpole community as a whole is a safe space is not important to you. To sit here and at the Finance Committee meeting, to hear so many members of the community said there is no racism in Walpole. It brings a bad taste to my mouth to talk about racism in Walpole. This conversation does not belong in town meetings. It's unfortunate and unwelcoming. If you're not a person of color and haven't experienced racism or oppression firsthand, what makes you say there isn't any in this community? Instead of denying it, you should all be saying, what can we do to stop it? What can we do to declare this community free from hate? I heard some of you say that this conversation belongs at home and not at the town level. I obviously disagree. This belongs at home, at the schools, at the town level, at the state level, at all aspects of our lives. I have experienced racism at multiple levels of my personal and professional life. I have been told, go back to your country. I am a citizen. I am a waste of taxpayers' money. I pay taxes. I don't belong here. You don't belong here. it had to be one of you. The list can keep going, I can keep going on and on. With the recent rise of blatant acts of violence by white nationalists and neo-Nazis, it makes me feel like the threats we people of color, people with accents, receive will continue to increase. My home and community should be the one place that I should feel the safest. Research shows the significant impact bystanders, you, have on the perpetration of crimes. When bystanders denounce violence, when they are clear and say, this behavior will not be tolerated in this community, the perpetrators will pick a different community that will stay silent and will not hold them accountable. Does the town of Walpole really want that? Some people might say that there's no hate or racism in Walpole. I suggest you take a look at the media recently. I suggest you go to Facebook posts. It's all over the place. So I understand that these conversations are very difficult and many of you don't want to talk about it. They may be difficult to you because talking about racism makes you feel uncomfortable. You don't want to think others are you don't want others to think that you're racist or you do not care about the issue. To some of you, it may be difficult because you feel threatened and that you will lose the opportunities that belong to you. On the other hand, these conversations are difficult for people like me because I'm going to leave here thinking, are my children going to be safe? Are my children going to be verbally bullied or attacked because I spoke up today? How many people will stop talking to me outside in the soccer fields? How many of you will not want to be seen in public with
30
me?
30 seconds.
That is what makes these conversations difficult to me. So I am going to end with what Martin Luther King Jr. once said. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. There being no further questions or comments, we will move the substitute motion to a vote. Yes, sir.
Born Precinct 5, I don't believe we had a vote to make the substitute motion the main motion, and I would like to move to make the substitute motion the main motion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Excuse me, sir, what was your name again? So all those in favor of making the substitute motion the main motion? Yes, Susan Lawson was the second. No, Susan Lawson seconded. Thank you. All those in favor of making the substitute motion the main motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
It is a vote. The ayes have it.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator. Can I ask Mr. Johnson to have my email with my proposal just put in public record so people can know what we could have voted on? I'm not going to make an amendment adjustment here. Okay? He's not there, but
I know he's not there.
We'll make sure he'll do it. Yeah. It's done.
It is a public record because you sent an email to Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Mr. Salvatore?
I move for, has a determination been made that
The substitute motion is the main motion that is a vote, which we are now going to vote on.
I move that for no action on the substitute motion. The motion, the article was replaced, but the motion...
The substitute motion is now the main motion.
Right.
And you move for no action.
On the main motion, on the main. So how did we get from...
Excuse me, Mr. Salvatore, 1 second.
Okay.
One moment, please.
Sure.
He needs a second.
Mr. Salvatore, the substitute motion was put in place to become the main motion. And if you're not in favor of the main motion, I think you should just vote accordingly rather than putting no action or abstain. That's where I'm going.
I'm just concerned. I have a question about how did the main motion that was the Finance Committee's motion?
Because there was a substitute motion that became the main motion. The body just voted on that. And we're going to vote on that.
I would alternatively ask that there be a substitute motion, that the main motion be of no action.
So you want to amend the main motion?
Yes. That there be.
Do you want to, you need to come down and make a motion and very quickly. Yes? We voted to make the main motion, the substitute motion, the main motion. Was correct, there was no action.
It's never voted. No. We didn't vote on the main motion.
No, he isn't.
Yeah, we don't even have a motion. He's making a...
The language...
Mr. Salvatore, can I do this? What I'm hearing is that you're opposed to the substitute motion, so I would suggest you vote accordingly, or not vote.
Well, that vote has already been taken to replace the main motion with the substitute motion. But what I'm asking, I was in favor of the alternative language.
But we don't have a motion with alternative language right now, Mr. Salvatore.
If a motion were to pass, I preferred the change in the language that reflected very many people's opinion, and I think a lot of people voted accordingly. But what I'm seeking to do is to have the main vote be a vote of no action going forward on the new language.
Mr. Salvatore, my interpretation is that this body has substituted the substitute motion is the main motion and it's for favorable action. That's what I'm going to call for.
Okay, and so I'm asking that amendment that
I do not have an amendment from you. You're basically...
There was some discussion in the midst of that, so I returned to the microphone.
And Mr. Salvatore, I answered you. You said that no action, you wanted to make a motion for no action. That's not a proper motion. That's your vote.
That's not.
I don't consider it a proper motion.
Can we inquire with town council as to the procedure
yes,
for making a motion?
I will, and then I'm going to just move forward. No. So if you have a motion, you should come up and write one.
I'll second.
Okay, we're going to take a vote on the substitute motion as it's been determined. We're moving forward. We're not going back and forth on this. So all those in favor of
I'd like to make a motion to table this. It is too confusing. There's a lot of people missing. I don't know if we have a quorum. I question the quorum.
76 people. There's definitely 76 people.
Mr. Hamilton has raised the point of no quorum.
No, we got...
One moment.
100 was a lot of guys. Did we lose a lot of people?
You need a signature? always second things because I just wanted to move along.
So folks, to determine the point of no quorum, it's just a standing count, okay? That's probably the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to ask the tellers, do we still have Monday night's tellers here? I actually know Mr. Hegler's not here. So I need 2 tellers from the left side that did not speak, by the way, on the article.
If we don't have
Thank you.
the meeting's over. I know, but if we don't, it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need a second teller from the left side, please. Who are my tellers over here? Do we have anybody from the first night? Yep. So I need are you going to substitute? Thank you very much. Yes. Yep, William Buckley. Who are my 2 tellers on the left side? I'm sorry. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Brian. Is John Nathan Childers. Is it Robert? Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. I wrote William too. When you've agreed your account, please come down to the microphone.
Beats me, John.
There's department heads mixed in on each one. You may want to ask people to stand to make it really clear.
Excuse me, folks, if you're an RTM member, just because I know we have some department heads sitting down in the rows, please stand so that there's no question as to who is an RTM. Thank you.
Everybody count off. Does everybody count off?
Hey, Mark. 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 You got me. Thank you. Thanks, sir.
Oh yeah, we're not gonna get shit done. Not Mike.
Is everybody ready? Okay. To the microphone, Robert.
35.
And you counted yourselves, right? Thank you.
Yes, we did.
Mr. Leaf?
64.
And Mr. Leaf, you counted yourself and the folks down front? Thank you very much. Mr. Connor?
12.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. And you counted yourself?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a quorum of 111 members, so we will continue with our business. Mr. Forsberg.
Mr. Moderator, point of order. I don't think you've read the language on the substitute motion. I know in the back here we're pretty confused on the exact language of the substitute motion.
If you would like, I will read the entire substitute motion.
Well, could you just tell us the changes in it?
Oh, sure. I went over that earlier. Let me do it again. So the only change was in the very first paragraph. Whereas the detestable message of hate professed by neo-Nazi and white nationalist organizations, and then it was inserted, and all other hate groups, and then continues on unchanged. Okay? The second change is in the third paragraph. Whereas today, white nationalism and neo-Nazism remain very real threats to the values that the town of Walpole stands for, and the rest of the sentence is struck at that point in time. So basically, they've removed its reinvention as the alt-right should not mitigate their hatred and ideologies. The last change is at the third paragraph from the bottom, where it says, "Therefore, be it resolved that we, the Walpole Town Meeting, strongly denounce and oppose the totalitarian impulses, violence, xenophobic biases, and bigoted ideologies that are promoted by white nationalists and neo-Nazis," and then it's inserted, "and all other hate groups," and then continues on as previously written. Is that clear? Mr. Pila.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moderator, through you, can someone please define the term white nationalist?
What?
Excuse me. That's a legitimate question. You're asking us to identify certain people that may or may not be associated with hate. It's only fair for those of us who would like a definition of white nationalism, because white nationalism supposedly was replacing the term white supremacist. That is something I think entirely different. So I would just like to appreciate a definition of white nationalism. Because I happen to be white, I happen to believe in national sovereignty, and I happen to believe in the Constitution. So if I believe in that, am I being defined as a white nationalist? I would like to know that from voting against myself.
I could go to the dictionary, or we could have a member. Oh, thank you, Ms. Grace. Thank you.
I have the dictionary.
Thank you.
White nationalist groups espouse white supremacist, Audrey Grace, Precinct 6, through you, Mr. Moderator. White nationalist groups are one that espouse white supremacist or white separatist ideologies, often focusing on the alleged inferiority of non-whites. There are examples here if you'd like them.
No, that's okay, but I would like, you're getting that definition from where, Ms. Grace?
The Southern Poverty Law Center.
No. I take exception to that. I really do. You have a Webster's dictionary that's dated before.
No, you know what? Let's take the Webster's definition. Why don't Ms. Brassett come down and read the Webster's definition, and then we're going to cease. Yes, Mr. Pila.
What edition of the Webster dictionary is because that definition in Webster has changed since the last 5-6 years. I'm sorry? Wait, we're supposed to be talking to the moderator.
So, Mr. Pila, you've asked your question, you've been giving some definitions. You may not agree with those definitions, but let's move on to a new question. Mr. Chekarowski?
Mr. Moderator, if it's appropriate, I'd like to call the question.
The question has been moved and seconded by Ms. Sullivan.
I was standing at my
So all those in favor, this requires a 2/3 vote. Mr. Salvatore, once the question's been moved, I'm sorry I saw Mr. Chekarowski. I apologize, and you've already previously spoken, so it goes to the next member. It requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor to move the question, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is a vote. The question has been moved. We are now voting on the substitute motion as the main motion for the resolution as I previously discussed. It is a vote for favorable action. Although it requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
It is a vote. It is a vote. Mr. Hamilton, I do not see any other members standing with you to challenge the vote. I think it was very clear that it was close to a unanimous vote, but not a unanimous vote. Mr. Hamilton, please take your seat so we can move on with other business. Thank you, sir. We are now going to pick up with Article 8. This is for a motion to appropriate Medicaid reimbursement amounts to the school budget. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $471,975, an amount equal to that received from the Medicaid reimbursements to the fiscal year 2018 school budget. Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee vote?
Finance Committee vote, favorable action, 13-0.
I'm sorry, just your microphone's 13-0?
13-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus, Board of Selectmen?
Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen voted 4-1-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Any questions or comments on Article 8? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. It is a vote. Article 9, a motion to appropriate McKinney-Vento Act amounts to the school budget. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $12,000, an amount equal to that received pursuant to the McKinney-Vento Act to the fiscal year 2018 school budget. Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee vote?
13-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus, Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Any questions or comments with respect to Article 9?
Should I just get further explanation about where the cash came from and where it required to be transferred?
Mr. O'Leary would like to know where the cash came from that is being passed into the budget. Mr. Johnson?
Sure. It was an amount received from the state as part of a reimbursement program. It was received last fiscal year, so it had to close out to free cash, so it gets reappropriated to the school department. It's funds they collect.
Is this similar to the previous one where it's a transfer because of the town's budget?
Mr. O'Leary, would you please come down to the microphone quickly?
Precinct 3. Is this a similar bookkeeping to the 8 and 10 then? That it has to be transferred from the town to the school department every year? Through you, Mr. Moderator.
Superintendent Lynch.
Lincoln Lynch, Superintendent of Schools. Mr. Moderator, could he repeat that? I didn't hear what the analogy was.
Is Article 9 in the same nature as Article 8 and 10, where we're transferring monies collected by the town for purposes of the school back to their budget.
Mr. Moderator, it is similar in nature that it's an expenditure from a previous year, a reimbursement for an expenditure. It is similar that it is a federal program that is the money is funded through the state, and then the state promulgates regulations. That's where the comparison ends. The Medicaid is reimbursement for medical costs provided for children to access the curriculum, and McKinney-Vento is reimbursement for homeless transportation, children who are homeless, and then the cost of transporting them to or from their previous district is shared at a 50% split by the sending community and the receiving community, and then the state decides what percentage they will reimburse the town, and the state decided they would reimburse the town of Walpole 40% of the town of Walpole's costs.
Mr. O'Leary, please limit your questions to McKinney-Vento. We're past the Medicare. It's been voted on.
I was just trying to get an idea. This is going to be a recurring issue every year.
Yes, this is a recurring cost unless the McKinney-Vento program is ended, and it is in place for this year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 10 is to appropriate student parking receipt amounts to the school budget. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash a sum of $37,000, an amount equivalent to that received for student parking to the fiscal year school budget. Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee vote?
Mr. Moderator, the Finance Committee voted 13-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus, Board of Selectmen?
Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen voted 4-1-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Any questions or comments with respect to Article 10? Mr. Salvatore?
Just for a point of explanation of my vote of no, it is actually the town that both maintains the parking lot and plows the parking lot and lights the parking lot, and not the school budget that does all of those things. So the town should be getting this money and not the school, and therefore I vote no.
Mr. Lynch?
Mr. Moderator, through you, sir, the town does indirectly get this money. Well, first of all, the school department is a department of the town. We are the town. Secondly, the town does get the money indirectly because we deflate our budget by the amount anticipated to be transferred at fall town meeting. So the appropriation in the spring is reduced by the anticipated amount. Full disclosure, the anticipated amount was $36,000. We had 5 additional students get their licenses mid-year, so it came in at $37,000. So there is an extra $1,000 that, if not needed, will be turned back to general fund.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Brown?
Kathy Garvin, Precinct 5.
My apologies.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the body. This is the only parking lot in town that has a charge. So the only place that anybody's paying for parking, other than obviously the MBTA, is to park at the school parking lot. So the only reason they're being charged is to offset some of the budget issues for the schools. So if we're going to give it back to the town, I would ask kindly of Dr. Lynch to drop the parking fees. I'm not really suggesting that. I'm just saying it's ludicrous.
Thank you, Ms. Garvin.
Thank you for causing that controversy, Kathy.
Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. It is a vote. Article 11, to appropriate for road projects. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $1,035,967 to resurface, repair, and/or reconstruct certain streets and/or sidewalks, to make drainage improvements in certain town roads, and to rebuild certain manholes and catch basins in the town of Walpole, and to meet this appropriation to transfer the sum of $775,967 from Chapter 90 funds and $260,000 from free cash. Mr. Valencourt.
The Finance Committee voted favorable action 14-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus, Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Mr. Forsberg.
Mr. Moderator, capital budget vote, committee voted favorable action 7-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Mr. Chekorowski.
Philip Shaharowski, Precinct 7, through you, Mr. Moderator. I want to applaud the town for installing the walk lights at some of the intersections of the walk on the streets. However, I want to make a plea for installing more of them. For example, at the on 27 near the MBTA parking lot, people cross in a very dangerous way. There's a number of places, so I don't know whether that money can come out of this budget, but I just want to make a plea for next year to see if we can accelerate the speed at which we're installing those lights, because I think it is a danger for pedestrians. And I know, again, that the town has installed quite a few of them, but there are a number of other places I think it would be critical to have them. So I'm not asking a question, I just want to make that statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chekorowski. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 11? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 12, appropriation and borrowing authorization for road improvements. It is regularly moved and seconded that $200,000 is appropriated for improvements to various streets within the town, consisting of the construction, reconstruction, or resurfacing of public ways or widening thereof, including land damages and the cost of concrete, macadam, or other pavement or road material of similar lasting character, and sidewalks constructed or reconstructed in connection with such improvements, and including the payment of costs incidental or related thereto. And that to meet this appropriation, the Treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is authorized to borrow $200,000 under General Law, Chapter 44, Section 7 or 8, and or any other enabling authority to issue bonds and notes therefore. And that the Board of Selectmen is authorized to take any other action necessary and convenient to carry out this project. Provided further that any premium received by the town upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any premium applied to the payment of the cost of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with General Law, Chapter 44, Section 20, thereby reducing by a like amount the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs. Any questions or comments? There being none, this is a borrowing article and requires a 2/3 vote. And Mr. Valencourt, how did the FinCom vote?
FinCom voted favorable action 14-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus.
Board of Selectmen voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Mr. Forsberg.
Mr. Moderator, capital budget voted, committee voted favorable action 7-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Again, this requires a 2/3 vote as it is a borrowing article. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Thank you. Article 13, appropriate monetary items of collective bargaining agreement. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to approve the monetary items in an agreement between the town of Walpole and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFL-CIO, State Council 93, Local 1957, Department of Public Works employees, and to raise and appropriate from taxation the sum of $31,000 and to transfer the sum of $12,000 from water retained earnings account to defray the cost of said agreement for the period July 1, 2017 to June 30th, 2018. Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 12-1-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus, Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Mr. Leith.
Thank you, John Leith, Precinct 1. I just wanted to quickly tell you why I was the negative vote in this. There were really three reasons. The first is that if you look at the contracts through town and you look at the COLAs, they vary pretty significantly, at least in my mind, from the firemen to the police to the clerical to the DPW. You may remember that I spoke before you actually at spring town meeting on this very issue. And the COLAs for this particular contract are the same as the COLAs for the clerical workers, which at the time, I personally felt that they were somewhat high. And the point that I made at that time was that somewhat high is okay, but over time, somewhat high adds up, and it can become, in the aggregate, very high. So my concern with this is, compared to the police and compared to the fire, I think it's probably about a quarter, maybe half a point too high. Maybe a quarter is more accurate. But I think that's meaningful, and I think where we're trying to allocate the funds of the town responsibly, this is important. Now, if you add to that another point that built into this contract, the workers were given the day after Thanksgiving off. Well, that wasn't quantified anywhere in the contract, but that adds up to approximately 0.4% per year. So the increase of 1.5 for the first year, 2.25 for the second year, and 2.25 for the third year, really, if you take into consideration that extra holiday, it's 0.4% higher than that. So it makes the offset, I think, even more extreme. And I'm also concerned that now that the clerical workers have this, and if this is voted through tonight, DPW will have it, then I think all the other unions will ask for it as well. And across the town, that's actually a significant cost. The last point that I want to make, so that was why I voted against it as part of the FinCom. So after the FinCom meeting, I took a look at just continuing the...
30 seconds.
Oh, boy. The thought process that little amounts add up over time. I looked at the last three contracts, and it's the issue of a COLA. The last three contracts, spanning 8 years, have caused the COLAs to increase actually at 8.5% more than the actual cost of living changes. And so it's not a small amount. It's actually a significant amount, which for an $80,000 salary would add up to about $6,000 per worker. And that's a lot of money if you multiply that by the number of workers. Thank you for giving me some additional time.
Thank you, Mr. Leaf. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 13? There being, oh, Mr. Valencourt.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you, just a couple of points and then a question for the town administrator. So on the positive side, the town got more flexibility in terms of, worker assignments and management rights, which is good. On the other side, the things that we gave up were the additional holiday. So this contract now provides 12 paid holidays for these workers. And the COLA adjustments, 1.5%, 2.25%, and then 2.25 for the next 3 years. But in addition to that are the step increases. So whoever's not on the top step is getting additional raise, as is a custom each year, by just moving up a step in addition to the COLAs. So my question for the town administrator, through you, Mr. Moderator, what is the number of employees that are below the maximum step, and or give us the breakdown of the step position with the workforce, if you could, so we can understand how that's going to impact this rate going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Moderator, through you, I believe I explained this to the Finance Committee during the presentation, but to reiterate, there are currently 27 employees on the top step and 17 are continued within step. So that's the split between the number of steps and numbers maxed out.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
It is a vote. Article 14, to appropriate monetary items of the collective bargaining agreement. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town take no action. Mr. Valencourt, Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee vote 15-0, no action.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus.
Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action. Oh, no action. Sorry.
No action. Thank you.
Sorry.
Are there any questions or comments with respect to Article 14? There being none, this is a motion for no action and requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous vote. Article 15, transfer water retained earnings to the Water Department budget. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from the Water Enterprise Retained Earnings Fund $74,000 to be used as an additional funding source for the fiscal year 2018 Water Department operational budget. Mr. Valencourt, the vote of the Finance Committee.
Finance Committee voted 15-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus?
Mr. Moderator, Board of Selectmen voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Mr. Brown, Sewer and Water Commission. And the vote? Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Pittman.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I have a question, maybe probably for the water and sewer folks. We just talked about how all this free cash, similar, is in a sense excess monies that was, accumulated and used for capital expense items. And in my mind, the Water Prize Enterprise Fund retained earnings is similar. Maybe I'm wrong, so maybe the water and sewer folks can straighten me out on that. So in my mind, we're using this to fund operations when we should be using the excess funds, which we are using on a town-wide basis for CapEx. So I'm kind of wondering why well, maybe I'm just misinterpreting it, but why it's different.
Mr. Abbott, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, Bill Abbott, Precinct 6, as well as a member of the Sewer and Water Commission. The rate that we establish incorporates not only salaries, expenses, the operational costs, but also any of our capital needs. And so one can construe that the $74,000 was addressing towards the capital portion.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pittman.
Fastenalo, Precinct 2. I'm 3, rather. Old precinct. One of the reasons, or the big reason why this was taken out of the retained earnings is that we wanted to keep our water rates no more than 2.5% increase. And this is how we're doing it. So your water rates for the next year will go up 2.5%, trying to keep in line with the state mandate.
Thank you, Mr. Fasanello. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor? Mr. Brown. Folks, if you're going to speak, please come down so we can kind of move this along efficiently and see what we can do before the lights go out. Mr. Brown.
Tom Brown, Precinct 6, Water and Sewer Commissioner. We got down to the 2.5% from the proposed rate of 3.9. So to lower it down to 2.5, we're just going to use the $74,000 from retained earnings to keep it basically affordable and keep it in line with the state mandates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor of this article, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a vote, unanimous vote. Okay, now we come to Article 29, which was taken out of order and approved Monday night. We have a substitute motion on this article from Ms. Hamilton and Ms. Lawson. Just a question, do I need to get the votes on the regular motion if we're going to a substitute? I should. Mr. Valencourt, the vote on the main motion?
Mr. Moderator, you're referring to Article 29?
Article 29, yes.
Sure, no problem. The Finance Committee voted to refer back to the Planning Board Committee 15-0.
And Mr. Kraus?
Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen voted 4-0-0 to refer it back to the committee.
Is Mr. Conroy here from the...
The Planning Board voted 4-1-0 to remand it to the Planning Board.
Thank you very much. And I apologize, I did not read the motion, which is to refer back to the Planning Board. So we have a substitute motion that was submitted by Ms. Hamilton, and Ms. Lawson seconded the motion. And the motion is to move to adopt a moratorium on the issuance of special permits under the zoning bylaw section 6C4A for 8 months until June 30th, 2018, to allow the planning board to study this provision. Ms. Barrows is the primary sponsor. You may come down and speak to the article. This is a motion to make this the main motion. Yeah, sure. You have your laptop. Come down here. Come on. And I know I'm making a dispensation here. It won't work, Cliff, because I know you don't have one.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So I had some time while you were all discussing articles to write a little bit so I don't sound like an idiot. My name is Liz Barrows, and I'm a resident in East Walpole. Currently, by special permit, developers can put more than one building on one lot in the general residence district. As you may or may not know, there have been quite a few applications recently for proposed development in the GR district. A project at the end of a cul-de-sac on Eastover Road, another on Plimpton Street, a proposed project which is currently in litigation off Pleasant Street and has started a new trend. My involvement with the issue began after I was notified as an abutter to a proposed 14 single-family condominium development that I and many of my neighbors are currently opposing. Although we, the many residents of the GR district, are appreciative that a little relief known to you as Article 31 was passed at Springtown meeting, it is evident that it was not enough. Many members of the Planning Board, the Building Commissioner, and Economic Development Director have all publicly stated that a problem with Section 6C4A still exists, and a more comprehensive solution is needed. So I decided to submit a citizen's petition to start a dialogue once again and show the town that more change is needed and that the time is now to effect that change. I assure everyone that if this substitute motion for a moratorium passes, it will not impact the project abutting my property, as the applicant has recently locked into a 3-year zoning freeze. However, if the substitute motion to adopt a moratorium on this section of the bylaw does get passed by the RTMs tonight, it will provide a much-needed relief for residents so that appropriate language can be drafted, submitted on the warrant, and voted on at Springtown meeting. It is my opinion that it will allow for a novel idea in politics, a compromise. Responsible building and development with a comprehensive plan demonstrating guidelines to be applied uniformly. Excuse me. It is my opinion that allowing even one more developer the opportunity to evade the rules set forth in other sections of the bylaw is just one too many. And I just want to speak to, how much time do I have? I would like to speak to some of the opposition to the moratorium when I had spoken to the Finance Committee and the Planning Board, et cetera, in the open forum specifically. First, this will not eliminate townhouses. This just is not true. We are not proposing to tear down Swan Pond or any existing townhomes. And I'm not proposing to cherry pick out of the bylaw based upon my one experience. It's a trend, and it's not just one project. In response to the state law requires multifamily, I'm certainly not suggesting we do not have multifamily. My understanding is multifamily, up to 3 units in one building, does not have anything to do with the section of the bylaw in this article. And to comment made that the GR is not intended to be single-family residences, I'm going to speak to some statistics that my friend, Mr. Askey, had spoke to that night. Of the 2,196 parcels in the GR zone, 989 of them are single family. So for a district that's not supposed to have single family, that seems like an awful lot. And then also, it was also stated that proposed units specifically behind my home would be affordable housing of about 350,000. I want to assure everyone that this bylaw that exists does not provide for affordable housing. The
30 seconds.
Behind my house were 650. And lastly, this section is subjective and lends itself to financially liability to the town for costs associated with litigation and guidance from town council. If you cannot agree with moratorium for any other reasons, please do so for the sole purposes of addressing the financial liability. Arguments that will eliminate townhouses.
Thank you, Ms. Barros. Mr. Salvatore.
Point of order. This is a citizen petition that asks for the deletion of certain sections of the zoning ordinance to now have an amendment that does a completely different thing that is has not gone through the planning board or zoning board or finance committee. Is that a proper amendment?
So, Mr. Salvatore, I did anticipate your question, not yours specific, but the question. And I actually questioned it myself, and through research done by town council, a moratorium in the way it's written has been approved by town council as it is a lesser matter than deleting the section.
Okay. And so I'll speak on that then. Last time we were requested to have a moratorium, it was on the open space zoning section. And it was suggested that they need to study it and look at it. A year later, there was nobody discussing it, no one suggesting any changes. And the next we heard, just prior to town meeting, the same person who had proposed the moratorium just said, let's delete it. Moratoriums are looked unkindly by the law, and you have to be very careful with the use of moratoriums to slow growth. And I would suggest that a moratorium is inappropriate in this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Mr. Flowers.
Andrew Flowers, Precinct 4. A little context here. I was against this motion as it was originally written, but then we voted to, of course, 15-0 to refer to the planning board. And I'm going to get into it, but I do support the moratorium by petitioner Liz Barros for 8 months. We do need clarity on this, but I just want to go into a little detail here because as a principle, as Selectman Salvatore just said, I actually agree with him that we should be very cautious about moratoriums. So, a little context here. This is going to come up again in Article 20. And I know a lot of you are snoozing. It's 11 p.m. and zoning, and it sounds boring. This really matters. And I'm not the expert. Sarah, who's going to speak, Joe, Jack, the planning board people, they're the experts. We need to study this. It matters. What does it boil down to? It took me a long time to figure this out. But what it boils down to is the GR zone, the general residence zone, and again, Jack and Sarah and everyone, Joe, correct me, is the kind of zone near downtown. It's supposed to be dense, right? And this section, 6C4A and 6C4B, deal with building, if I remember correctly, multiple buildings on a single lot. So it's a special permit process, so you don't have to get a variance through the Zoning Board of Appeals, or you don't have to go to Section 5 to have the same requirements, restrictions in terms of abutters and setbacks and blah, blah, blah. That's the way I understand it. And so this matters a lot because, and here's my point, here's why I do oppose the original Article 29 as it was presented by the petitioner, is that this town has an affordable housing problem, and it's causing us to grapple with these 40B developments that none of us like to do, right? The Board of Selectmen don't want to deal with it. I don't blame them. Well, we need to build more affordable housing if we don't want to deal with 40Bs. Often, affordable housing means denser housing. And the GR zone, specifically this subsection, section 64A, was kind of, it's a special permit process that's why developers are going through it. It's an escape valve. It's less restrictive. It's allowing them, as I understand it, to build these denser housing, these multiple buildings on a single lot. So really you have to ask yourself, and we're going to talk about this in the spring, what's the intention here? Is the intention to clarify the rules, make consistent standards, and to minimize the litigation cost of the town? If it is, I'm fully in support of such an article, and that's what Ms. Barrows did speak about. But if the intention is just to cut out, and some would call this snob zoning, cut out dense development opportunity, that's going to shoot us in the foot. It sounds good in theory that, like, you want to, quote unquote, keep in character with the neighborhood and not have these dense buildings, but it's going to make the town continuously have to grapple with 40Bs in the future. So just keep this in mind. Again, I'm supporting this. It's moratorium, but 8 months, that's about as far as I'll stretch. After that, we need to grapple with consistent rules, so let's make the rules consistent, but let's not get too happy with moratoriums. I'm going to repeat this point on Article 20. Let's not get too not in my backyard when it comes to denser housing, and we just need more housing, period. It doesn't matter if it's $800,000 condos, just more housing, period, and moratoriums prevent that. So that's my point.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. You have an excellent internal clock. Ms. Khatib.
Sarah Khatib, Precinct 8, also a member of the Planning Board. Just, I guess, point of order question, is the moratorium only for Section A or also Section
It's only for Section A, yes.
Okay, and then could I hear the opinion of Town Council on the moratorium? Like, what are the impacts? What are the issues?
Yes, Town Council.
Mr. Moderator, through you. The question as to what the moratorium applies. The moratorium would apply to Section 6C4A, and essentially what it would mean is that until July, no more special permits would be issued under that section.
So a developer could come in and request a variance.
Town Council.
Yeah, this, as far as this is drafted, it would just prevent them from getting a special permit under this section. So any other relief that might be available in the zoning bylaw would continue to be available.
Okay, but could I hear the opinion of the building commissioner, or yell it out? Yes or no?
Good evening, David Norton, Building Commissioner. Yes, someone would be able to come in and get a variance if they chose to. Also, this does not also, Article 31, which a lot of these members here will remember last year and how it went, actually fixed part of 6C4. And this original motion and the amendment do not deal with Section 5 at all, which Article 31 tied into. So that piece should have been looked at as well, because 6C4 does specifically talk about 5. So that being said, I don't think this fully goes to the scope it needs to get to. A moratorium, again, is still not dealing with 5, Section 5, and also, like she just asked, the variance process, they'd still be able to do it. But also under 5, someone, like, I'm going to give you a case in point. Just developer came to me recently and asked me about a certain parcel here. And he asked me if he could put 12 units on this property, which would be 4 3-unit buildings. And I mentioned this whole article to him, and he said, well, it doesn't matter, because if, in fact, it gets voted up and he can't do 4 buildings, then he's going to do just 1 large building. So there's always that as well. So you're not really bringing down density at all. Density still will stay the same. It'll just be 1 building, 1 large building instead of 4 in that case.
Thank you.
So I know I've used some of my time, but I just wanted to say a couple things. So I am a member of the planning board, and I voted to send this back to committee. I think that's the appropriate vote at this time. Ms. Barrows submitted this citizen's petition, and she highlighted an issue that seems to exist. There are several people on the planning board and, residents have noted that there are not sufficient clear guidelines for this case of multiple buildings per lot. So it is maybe something that we need to deal with. It's not something I think we should vote for in town meeting, back and forth. So if we were to delete this section, that's a previous motion, but it doesn't give us any more clear guidance to that path. So I am not in favor of deleting the section. The moratorium, I think will be issues because of the variance, but I will listen to the next speakers.
Thank you, Ms. Khatib. Mr. Trudell.
Trudell, Precinct 4, member of the Finance Committee. When we voted to refer back to the Planning Board, the intent from several of us was the hope that through seeking out an opinion from council that there would be an opportunity for a substitute motion which would allow them to put a moratorium in. And obviously, since our public hearing and our vote, that took place, so I rise in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Hasenjager.
Hasenjager, Precinct 1, Realtor, Builder, whatever. The complaint department of Walpole, as far as this business goes, is the Economic Development Commission. And for the last 10 years, we continuously get complaints about potential investors and new businesses that come to Walpole, about the severity, the overzealousness of permitting and approval, and to the dysfunction and loss of tax base to us. And I'll give you one example. If you look at Auto Mile in Norwood and look at Walpole and see we have no dealerships, there's a reason for that. It's a very profitable type of business to have in your community. It's been alleged there's a problem with multiple houses on a lot. The semantics are wrong. We're talking about large parcels of land, 5, 10 acres. They're not lots. They're large acreages. One that's built Eastover Road, 5 acres, 12 units. That's over 20,000 square feet per unit, which is less density than any of the single-family homes in East Walpole. A lot of misrepresentation here. People alleging there's a problem. There's no problem. The zoning book has worked for decades. We used to have 2 books, a blue one and a yellow one. The zoning book belongs to the zoning board, not to the planning board. The planning board seems to keep meddling in the zoning book, saying there's problems. The zoning board has never come forward and said there's any problem with the zoning book or the zoning bylaws. This is the fable of the planning board. Certain dysfunctional members are against all development. And you've seen them here. They tried to get rid of in-law apartments. They got rid of open space planning. They deceived you about a moratorium that never ended, and now they're attacking townhouses. They're attacking, there's only one of these developments that had been built that's similar to what was proposed. The lady who is aggrieved, actually, the project that she's talking about, it was turned down. It's not going to be built. Now, Riverwalk is a project that is built. I offer you to drive through Riverwalk. I live 10 feet from Riverwalk. The neighbors all love it. It's a beautiful, well-manicured, perfect spot.
30 seconds.
No one could object to this. This is what they're trying to get rid of. A moratorium is putting 1/3 of the homes in this town have someone who works in the real estate field. Masons, carpenters, builders, mortgage brokers, engineers, all folks who are being displaced. You have a moratorium, you're putting people out of work. If a teacher had a problem about their salary, they wouldn't come to town meeting and say, let's have a moratorium. Don't pay the teachers for a year while we study it.
Thank you, Mr. Hassenjager. Mr. O'Leary.
Oh, Jesus.
Robert O'Leary, Precinct 3. I was going to bore you with all the back of the book changes that have occurred with 4C, with this particular bylaw, 4C4, which was 4C4 in 1985, but I'm going to skip to the middle and not bore you with what started in 1985 or before and has ended up with the change we had last Springtown meeting. In October 19th, 1994, we added common driveways, which said no more than 3 dwelling units would go on those common driveways. So that's something to keep in mind, as well as the use table. Now, they say there's a loophole that was created starting with Eastover Road, but the extent of that loophole without a building on a lot would be the extent of the common driveway limits, which is 3. As far as an existing building, we have the use table to deal with that. Now, multiple buildings need rules. 64A sets none that the use table doesn't already have. Now, the comments at the planning board, the 3 of the newer members, were unintended consequences. We're already there. Unknown goals. Well, is that before or after Eastover Road? And then you're going to get beat up at town meeting. Well, I think the neighborhoods are getting beat up already. Now, one important note is, can a reasonable person, reasonable intelligence, look at 64A and understand it without confusion? The answer is no. It means different things to different people. The bylaws should be removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Mr. Forsberg.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Forsberg, Precinct 7. I'm against this article, both the moratorium and deleting section 6.4A and B. And it's actually the zoning, the general residence, that allows you to build multifamilies, and the density is what actually dictates how many units you can put in there. So my interpretation is if you deleted this section that they are requesting to, it would just allow you not to do individual buildings, but it would never stop you from building a commercial type apartment building as long as it is within the square footage and the setbacks and the height restrictions. So when I look at this article, the special permit in 6C4A would allow you to build like 1 or 2-story buildings that would be in harmony of the neighborhood. So that is the only thing that you would be preventing to do if you deleted this section. So it might be they would be looking to restrictions on the general residence zoning rather than deleting this section right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Mr. Moraski.
Moraski, Precinct 8, member of the Planning Board. Mr. Moderator, would you read the substitute motion that is proffered by 2 RTM members?
Move to adopt a moratorium on the issuance of special permits under the zoning bylaw, section 64CA, for 8 months until June 30th, 2018, to allow the planning board to study this provision.
Okay, so to correct what previous speakers have indicated, we're not deleting, or the substitute motion is not deleting anything at this time. It is just an 8-month period to study this particular section. This particular section has caused a lot of problems. It has caused problems with town council expenditure into the thousands of dollars, and it has caused a lot of problems with respect to inconsistent interpretations of the lack of standards for those special permitting granting authorities who are allowing or providing special permits. Mr. Hassenjager should know a little bit better about this. The Zoning Board of Appeals, in my history of over 4 decades of being involved with town meeting, finance committee, planning board, whatever, I have never seen the Zoning Board of Appeals ever submit an article to change zoning. Zoning is the purview of the planning board. That's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morawski. Ms. Lawson?
Lawson, Precinct 2. I voted in FinCom to refer this to Planning Board because it was abundantly clear after listening to the debate back in spring on Article 31 and then on the petitioner, the citizens petition this time around. What came through loud and clear was that there was a lot of confusion. There is a difference of opinion even among our town officials as to what different language means and what different sections will permit. My concern, and Mark Trudell spoke to this earlier, my concern is that until the people in town who know the most about this get together and fix the language, we need to just have a timeout. Maybe they will, at the end of the day, recommend that a section or sections be deleted, maybe not. But my concern is this. Because under the section 6.4C, whatever it is, there's inconsistent application because, as I understand it, the criteria are amorphous, ambiguous, and vague, that you can get different results. And it's not at all clear that there is an ability to be uniform from one application to the next. Whereas under Article 5, under Section 5, there are much clearer standards. As a lawyer, I get concerned when I feel that the town is in jeopardy because decisions are not based on a clear rubric that can be applied from one applicant to another. Therefore, that is why I am in favor and have seconded this amended motion to refer back to Planning Board, but have a moratorium. And let's stop until we can figure out what it is we actually want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Mr. O'Leary, sorry, Mr. Forsberg, you've spoken previously. We'll get to you.
John O'Leary, Precinct 3. Just a point of clarification to you, Mr. Moderator. How is it worded again, the article in the substitute motion? What is the article numbered as?
Move to adopt a moratorium on the issuance of special permits under the zoning bylaws, section 6C4A, for 8 months. Is that sufficient?
Yes.
Okay.
Letters, previous speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Forsberg.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I'd like maybe town council's opinion on this, because I think the only thing, the moratorium isn't going to stop any multifamily units as long as it's a single building. The only thing the moratorium would do is allow the special permit to build separate buildings or more than one building on the property.
Is that more properly to the building commissioner? Does that mean town council?
It's an excuse me.
Either way.
Oh, go ahead.
So, through you, Mr. Moderator, the moratorium would only affect the issuance of the special permit under this section. It doesn't affect any permits that would not require, any building that would not require a special permit under this section.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Mr. Hassenjager.
Yeah, a couple of quick points. I did give a handout from the real estate brokers that maybe the Chamber of Commerce wants to speak to. They don't want to be put out of work. Riverwalk, just for your information, Riverwalk produces over $380,000 a year of pure profit tax revenue to the town of Walpole. That's more than the combination of the Walmart complex, Hollingworth and Vose, and the Kendall Building complex. These are cash cows and profitable to town. These are in all towns. There's nothing unique about townhouses in small developments, condominium developments. They're in every town you can think of. Why people are thinking there's something wrong in Walpole and we can't have these is ridiculous. There's nothing, again, this is a section that's been attacked by certain anti-development people, but I believe this moratorium will be found illegal by the by the Attorney General, and it's causing us to have snob zoning because it's not allowing multifamily. And I gave a handout that shows the difference between a piece of property of the same size where you would have 4 townhouses, and I don't know if maybe people didn't see this and I can't really hold it up, but townhouses that look like this. On that same land, if they're forced to a 40B, you have a tower. And that's where you're driving the investors and the developers by being snob zoners, okay? You're not helping the town of Walpole. You may get a kick out of throwing a monkey wrench into the real estate business and hurting real estate people, but you're ultimately hurting the town of Walpole. And this is the most attractive and beneficial tax revenue part of our entire tax base. These residential neighborhoods where you folks live, with the kids that go to school, we maintain the streets, we hardly make any money on those. On these townhouse developments, it's almost pure revenue to the town because they maintain all the utilities, all the roadways, all their own costs, and they are usually age restricted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hasenjager. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I favored Article 31. This falls far short of that. But in an attempt to rehabilitate my reputation, I will support and vote for this.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Buckley.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I move the question.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Who seconded it? Robert. Okay. The question has been moved and seconded. It just requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of moving the question, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh. We got to move the question to vote on the substitute motion, yes. Thank you, that's what I'm moving. Thank you for the clarification. Again, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote to move the question, which makes the substitute motion the main motion. All those in favor of making the substitute the main motion, which is a simple majority vote, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let's do that one more time. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Now we have this now requires a 2/3 vote because it is a change to the zoning bylaw. So all those in favor of the substitute motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Guess what, folks? Standing vote time. I need tellers.
This is a joke.
Do I still have all my tellers on both sides? Yes, I do. Okay, those in favor, please stand. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Tellers, if you're in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? Okay, 4-2. Thank you, tellers. Those in favor now, please rise.
Why do we have to get, why do we have to pass this? Because that's huh? We can't take that off.
When you've got, yeah, please.
23.
23?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley.
26.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell.
2.
Mr. Connor. Excuse me?
2.
2. All those opposed, please rise. Go ahead, Ms. Buckley.
4.
4, thank you.
18.
18, thank you.
3.
3. Thank you, Mr. Connor.
Oh, God.
The motion passed by 1 vote.
Mr. Moderator.
It was 55 to 50, well, to 27, sorry. When I said by 1 vote, the 2/3 majority, it required 55 votes to get a 2/3 majority. Okay? So the motion passes.
Mr. Moderator, move to adjourn.
Excuse me, hold on 1 second before you make that motion. I would like to encourage this body to move forward with Article 16. It is very important to this town. I will actually have Mr. Johnson give you a brief remark if you'd like to hear that before I ask you to hold.
Can I just plead my case?
You second my, okay, thank you, Mr. Snuffer. Mr. Johnson, could you give us a brief comment on Article 16 and then you can decide?
Sure. Thank you for sticking around. I know it's been a late night. I'm asking this body to just simply consider Article 16 before you adjourn. There are some other repercussions in the background. I don't want to get into specifics as far as sites, but there is a 40B that has been discussed in town. This article will impact that. If this article goes through, there won't be a 40B coming through very close to the center of town. If it doesn't go through, I've been informed as early as today that the developer is ready to go. So I'm asking this body, just in case we don't get a quorum next Wednesday evening, to just simply consider Article 16. What you have before you in Article 16 is to basically change the age-qualified section of the zoning bylaw to allow 15-acre parcels basically in the downtown area. There are maybe 3 or 4 sites that are going to be impacted in town. One specifically is the Walpole Woodworkers site, and it will allow for an age-qualified village on those 3 or 4 sites in town. And I'm sure my building commissioner and Liz Dennehy, our community development director, can speak to that, but I just ask that you stay for this one vote.
Everybody okay with proceeding with one more article? Thank you. This is a motion to amend the zoning bylaw to insert age-qualified village. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw as set forth in the warrant under Article 16. This will require, well, actually, Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee vote.
Moderator, the Finance Committee voted favorable action 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Kraus?
Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Planning Board?
Planning Board voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 16? Mr. Gallivan.
I speak in favor of this article. Those of you know that the Walpole Woodworkers site is included in this age-qualified village zoning. It's not spot zoning. There's multiple sites involved. This site will be a 40B development. I'm told that the developer has received permission from the state to move forward with 250 units on that site. And as Jim mentioned, they're ready to go. We did reach out to the developer when they started talking about this project again. And those of you who may remember, it's been talked about on and off, on and off, on and off for about 10 years. Selectman Regasta and I, along with Jim Johnson and some other members of the town, did spend some time with the developer talking about options. I think an age-qualified village of about, and I don't have the numbers, at 175, 180, in that range, is a lot better for the town than another 40B. These would be condos, so these would be people buying into the age-qualified village, and not, just 40B apartments. We have 40B apartments going in on Moose Hill Road. We have 2 more apartment complexes going in right downtown. I think an age-qualified village would be a great thing for the town compared to a 40B. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Mr. O'Leary.
Robert O'Leary, Precinct 3. Could somebody explain to me, through you, Mr. Moderator, why this is not spot zoning?
Mr. Johnson?
We were very mindful of not doing spot zoning with this particular article. You will notice that there's, as I mentioned, there are other parcels in town that would be impacted. I know we've done an inventory search. I don't have them off the top of my head, but it is not spot zoning because there's other sections of town that this particular AQV could be done on.
So this is part of the master plan,
Mr. Johnson?
I don't believe the master plan has been updated in some time, so it has not had a chance to consider this matter.
So it would be spot zoning at this particular time, then?
No, it would not.
So if we have a specific purpose, specific zoning, and now we're allowing a non-conforming use to go into it, wouldn't that be spot zoning?
I repeat,
as
it would not be spot zoning.
As defined, it appears to be
Your question,
spot zoning.
your question's been answered, Mr. O'Leary.
No, it hasn't.
Your question was, would it be spot zoning? And he said, no, it's not spot zoning.
How about the definition, through you, Mr. Moderator, of what spot zoning is?
Do you know the definitions,
Yes,
Mr.
I
O'Leary?
have 2 of them.
Okay, could you read it to us?
I will. The allowance of a non-conforming use in an area zoned for a specific purpose. Secondary explanation. Zoning without a master plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Mr. Chekarowski.
Philip Sharofsky, Precinct 7. Through you, Mr. Moderator. I just have a quick question on one of the clauses. It says developers of AQV 15-acre projects are encouraged but not required to designate at least 15% of the units within the development as affordable. Through you, Mr. Moderator, is this something that we could make mandatory, or or is this beyond the legal ability of us to to define the zoning? And I'm only saying this in the sense that we recognizing that we do need a more affordable housing. Was this an opportunity to get more affordable housing?
Council and I just confirmed, Mr. Moderator, through you, it's beyond the scope right here. The intent here was, when we were writing this, we wanted to encourage it, but not require it. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, Town Council.
Tim Hempton, Precinct 1. I actually just want to make a comment. I want to thank Selectman Gallivan and Selectman Regasta for their efforts on this issue. Whatever you have to say, it does this will result in increased housing for our seniors, while at the same time potentially, well, I'm just going to say that, and I thank them for their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hempton. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 16? If not, this motion requires a change to our zoning bylaw, so it requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is a vote.
Mr. Moderator, if you could just declare a 2/3 vote.
It's a 2/3 vote.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Excuse me?
No, not to
Yeah,
dissolve.
excuse me, folks, don't run out yet. I got some instructions here. So we have a motion to adjourn by Chandler Sullivan, seconded by Mr. Moraski. We will adjourn on next Wednesday night as the Attorney General has this facility. Mr. Johnson, have we confirmed that this is available on Wednesday night?
Yes, we have.
We have, okay. Folks, we need a quorum. So if we don't have a quorum, we'll come back again.
See you, Jimmy.
Thank you, folks.